Hi, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone, and I'm here with my good friend, Dee Pierce, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends.
Happy to be here.
Hello, Dee.
Yes. Hello, Joe.
So, our topics for tonight are China's evolving war capabilities. And we have three different, rather shocking pieces on that subject. And then our other topic is Russian resolve, and this is in relation to their response to the attack on the bombers and the bridges that we saw a little over a week ago. And then we have the topic of the end game, okay, in Ukraine. We have two very interesting videos featuring Scott Ritter dealing with that subject. Both videos are very illuminating in their own way. Uh, so, we'll of course start off sharing on Facebook as we usually do,
hmm
and then we will move to the first of our articles. Please do like, share, and subscribe as usual. We need a lot of people to come and see this because uh, really there are many important things to say that as many people as possible should know.
Exactly. The Western media is not going to tell you. The
Yeah,
regular media stations aren't going to tell you,
yeah,
really what's going on.
they're not going to talk about what's going on with new Chinese weapons,
Right.
and so you're not going to understand uh, how serious the international situation is with China. So there is that, and that's very important.
Yes, it is. Okay. Sharon and Sharon and Sharon.
Yeah, sharing, indeed.
Mhm. Oh, hello, Steve Wolfbrand.
Hello, Steve Wolfbrand. How are you today? I hope you're very well.
And I was reading this article, and it was talking about how the U.S. has people so brainwashed, um, where Russia and China is concerned. It's for, you talk about it's been years and years and decades and how blinded people are.
Yes, and unfortunately, blind people do not see very well,
hmm
and deaf people do not hear very well. And people who are being misled as to the facts of the world do not decide things very well.
That is true.
So here we are. We will share the screen for the first of our pieces. And the first one is called From Kill Chain to Kill Web: How China is Evolving Its High Tech Warfare Capabilities. This one is by Wabin. We picked it up at the Guns Review. It was done on June 3rd, 2025. And here's a picture of, looks like, I don't know, might be drones. Anyway, they look like very powerful drones if they're drones. In 2020, Christian Bros wrote a book. This is starting the article titled, quote, The Kill Chain, unquote, in which he discussed the coming U.S. China military conflict. Bros was the principal advisor to Senator John McCain on national security and military issues, and his staff director when John McCain was the chairman of the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee. In the book, Bros talked about how China was building a, quote, kill chain, unquote, against any U.S. Military invention near China's shores. The kill chain was focused on what Bros termed, uh, quote, us, uh, um, uh, um, 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 what he termed assassin's mace, unquote. Asymmetrical weapon systems, primarily hypersonic missiles, that could prevent U.S. forces in its western Pacific bases, aircraft carrier groups, and strike fighters from approaching the theaters of operation that include Taiwan, the South China Sea, and the East China Sea. Such a strategy is called anti-access area denial, A2AD. Interesting sort of acronym there. In the recent India-Pakistan air combat, we have witnessed an indirect manifestation of the military concept and capabilities of the Chinese, which is the driving force between Pakistan's stellar combat performance. The battlefield actions clearly show that China has evolved from the linear, quote, kill chain, unquote, to a, quote, kill web, unquote, that integrates diverse platforms, sensors, and weapons across domains to create overlapping, resilient attack uh, uh, um, uh, vectors, ensuring mission success even in high intensity combat situations or environments. The systems warfare in the India-Pakistan air combat consists of Chinese J-10C fighters, PL-15E air-to-air missiles, HQ-9P air defense systems, and EDA-03 um, um, early warning aircraft. These weapon systems executed a perfect triangular attack vector, now referred to as the ABC kill web. AHQ9P detect, BJ10C shoot, and CEDK03 guide. This beyond visual range kill web took down multiple expensive independent fighter jets without losses of any of, of their own assets. Such sensor shooter fusion technology is the defining feature of future air combat. Of course, the India-Pakistan air combat demonstrated only a few elements of the multi-domain full kill web that China has developed. Also, the weapon systems used by the Pakistan Air Force is a full generation behind what is deployed at the PLA. That's, of course, China's army. China's full A2AD platform encompasses a comprehensive suite of weaponry and systems, including various air and naval assets, hypersonic missiles, and other novel weapons such as the one-of-a-kind CH-T1 ground effect UAV, of course, which is an unmanned aerial vehicle, which I'll discuss in a separate article. China's warfighting doctrine and capabilities have evolved much further than the kill chain described by Bros 5 years ago. The kill web is a multi-layered, redundant, and networked arsenal to achieve the mission objectives in China's A2AD strategy. Let's start with an overall introduction of the main weapon platforms that are well known in military technology circles and in the public domain. In a series of follow-up articles, I'll discuss several latest Chinese weapon systems that are unique to, to the uh, 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 Chinese military. This follows my past articles on hypersonic air-to-air missile, hypersonic near-space drones, and the new aerial combat platforms shown at the Zhuhai Air Show in 2024. I'll skip similar weapons that exist in the Western militaries in order to highlight the Miltech innovations underway in China. The goal of this article is to illustrate what the kill web looks like for future high-end conflicts. Next section is called China's A2 slash AD kill web. China's A2 slash AD strategy leverages a networked multi-domain approach to counter U.S. naval and air power, particularly aircraft carriers, through redundancy and integration. Key components of China's kill web include the following. Here are the data sources: Grok, and Gemini. So we use the AIs to get some information. One, anti-ship, ballistic missiles, ASBMs. The first of these, there were three aspects of these. One is systems, the DF-21D, 80 to 100 missiles. The range of those is 1,500 to 1,800 kilometers. The DF-26, approximately 100 to 150 missiles. 3,000 to 4,000 kilometer range. That 3,000 to 4,000 kilometer range is roughly, 4,000 kilometers. In miles is 2,400 miles, so fairly long range.
Mm-hmm.
CH ASX-13, KD-21, 30 to 50 missiles, greater than 3,000 kilometer range. So those were the systems. The role of those: high-speed, long-range strikes to target carriers from standoff distances with warheads that are maneuverable to evade defenses. Then the redundancy aspect is multiple missile types with overlapping ranges ensure saturation attacks, overwhelming carrier defenses, such as the Aegis systems. Next, anti-ship cruise missiles, the ASCMs. Systems include the YJ-83, 2,000 to 3,000 missiles, 180 to 250 kilometer range. The YJ-12 cruise missiles, 500 to 1,000 of those, 290 to 400 kilometer range. The YJ-21 cruise missiles, 100 to 300 missiles, 1,000 to 1,500 kilometer range. YJ-18, 500 to 700 submarine launched cruise missiles, approximately 540 uh, uh, kilometer range. The role of these systems is subsonic, supersonic, and hypersonic missiles launched from ships, submarines, and aircraft for close and medium range attacks, exploiting different uh, uh, um, um, trajectories and speeds. Redundancy, diverse launch platforms, surface ships, submarines, H-6 types of bombers, ensure multiple attack vectors, complicating interception by the United States. And then three, CHT-1 ground effect UAVs, specs first developed in 2017, 50 to 200 units estimated. The range is 1,200 kilometers, and the payload is 1,000 kilogram payload. Remember, a kilogram is 2.2 pounds. So we're talking 2,200 pounds of payload, more than a ton. This includes torpedoes, explosives, and there's a potential for nuclear warheads here. The UAVs fly at 0.5 to 1 meter altitude. Is that 1 meter? Altitude for stealth. Wow, those are really low flying, aren't they? Role, stealthy, low altitude attacks to deliver torpedoes or bombs, evading radar detection due to ground effect flight. Redundancy adds a unique, low cost, low observable platform to the kill web, complementing high speed missiles with slower, hard to detect strikes. Its ability to operate from naval vessels enhances flexibility. Number four, naval and submarine forces systems, 370 naval vessels, including 8 Type 055 destroyers, 25 Type 052D destroyers, approximately 41 submarines, Type 039A One class. The role of these systems is surface ships deploy the ASCMs and the ASBMs, while the submarines deliver YJ-18 missiles and torpedoes targeting the carriers at varying ranges. Redundancy, large fleet size ensures massed firepowers, with submarines providing covert attack options if surface assets are neutralized. After reading all this, I don't imagine the surface assets are going to be neutralized very fast. Anyway, number five, airborne platforms. Systems, H-6N K bombers, 30 to 50 carrying CH ASX-13, YJ-12 types of missiles, J-16, J-15, J-10C fourth generation fighters carrying YJ-12, YJ-21, and YJ-83 missiles, J-20s, J-35s, those are fifth gen fighters, and J-36 and J-50 sixth gen fighters. See a separate article on the J-36, China's latest sixth generation fighter. The role of these systems is extend A2/AD reach through air launch type missiles, enabling strikes beyond coastal defenses. Redundancy, bombers and fighters provide additional launch platforms, ensuring attacks persists even if ground or naval assets are disrupted. Number 6 is AWACS and ISR systems. Systems KJ3000, Y22 dual A radars, 360 degree coverage, KJ700 Y9 based multi-sensor suite. As I read all that stuff, I know it's very hard to understand because, you know, all these alphabet things are being thrown at us. I don't think it's so important to concentrate on the precise details of all these things here. But I think what is being presented is the components of a fantastic layered system of defense. Uh, really impressive in terms of the variation of missiles and carriers and UAVs, all involved in this. Anyway, continuing with the role, provide real-time targeting data, detecting stealth and low-flying targets, e.g. US F-35s, cruise missiles, to guide missiles and UAVs like the CH-T1. Redundancy, multiple AWACS platforms backed by satellites, the Yaogan series and Beidou constellation, and over the horizon, OTH types of radars with a range in kilometers of 2,000 kilometers to ensure continuous situational awareness. And their air defense systems. God, I thought we were already going over systems, but this is systems HQ-19. The range of this, to defend against anti-ballistic missiles, 3,000 kilometers, 1,800 miles range, that is. Okay, these are in the testing phase. The HQ-9B, 260 kilometers, that's the SAM range.
Mm-hmm.
The HQ-22, 170 kilometer range. The Type 625E SHORAD, that's, roughly 10 kilometer missile range. And Metal Storm, short range defense. That's discussed in a separate article. I can imagine what this is just flying metal at anything incoming. The role is project launch platforms, command centers, and coastal bases from U.S. counterstrikes, ensuring the killer web's survivability. Redundancy, layered defenses, long, medium, and short range, counter diverse threats, ranging from the ballistic missiles to drones, preserving A2/AD capabilities. Number 8, cyber and electronic warfare, EW, systems. Cyber units, EW platforms, type 815G spy ships, jamming systems. Role: disrupt U.S. command and control, jam radars, and degrade carrier defenses. Enhancing missile and UAV effectiveness. Redundancy, cyber, and EW complement kinetic strikes targeting U.S. networks to delay or confuse responses. The next section is about a total arsenal estimate. China's
Mm.
A2/AD kill web includes
Mm-hmm.
33,330 to 5,450 anti-carrier platforms. My God.
Okay.
These include ABMs, 180 to 250, DF-21D, DF-26, the CH ASX-13, about which more later. The AS CMs, and those are the cruise missiles. The BMs are the ballistic missiles. Approximately 2,600 to 4,300 of those, including YJ-83 missiles, YJ-12 missiles, YJ-21 missiles, and YJ-18 missiles. Then there are the UAVs, CHT-1, UAVs. I think those were what was in the picture we started off with. Approximately 50 to 200 supporting systems, hundreds of ships, submarines, aircraft, AWACS, and air defense batteries, plus cyber uh, um, uh, slash EW, electronic warfare capabilities. In his 2020 book, The Kill Chain, Christian Brose argues that China's networked multi-domain approach
Mm-hmm.
paces the U.S.'s linear platform-centric kill chains. Since the book's publication, China's A2/AD capabilities. Bonnie's handing me a vote. Oh, a note. She's telling me she's changing the clothes. Okay. China's A2 to. Okay, did I go down a little bit? Since the book's publication, China's A2/AD capabilities have evolved into a full-fledged kill web, integrating missiles, USVs, naval, air, and space ISR assets that creates a formidable barrier in the Western Pacific. The kill web is designed to deny U.S. carriers access to the Taiwan Strait, the South and East China Sea, complicating intervention in any conflicts near Chinese shores. Overwhelming defenses through saturation attacks with diverse platforms attacking simultaneously. I mean, when I read this, my initial reaction is stay away from China. Stay away from China.
Exactly.
China's A2/AD strategy forms a textbook kill web and is a reflection of traditional Chinese military thinking, quote, winning without fighting, quote. The ultimate goal is to assemble such overwhelming capabilities that its enemy will realize the futility of militarism and cease and desist from any attempt to intervene in China's affairs. Wow, I'm overwhelmed by this. Okay, let's see if we've got any comments on this at this point. I know the details were hard to understand. Okay, Alan Huey says, I missed the beginning. Sorry, Alan, we have too much to cover. I can't go back. I'm sorry that you missed the beginning. But one of the things we talked about in the first article, uh, we're now going to talk about in the second in more detail. And that one is in another article by Wabin. entitled CH-AS-X13 air launched hypersonic ballistic missile.
Hmm.
This piece was written on June 4th, one day after the first piece. Hypersonic weapons are deployed in all of China's war-fighting domains.
Hmm.
That sounds really discouraging since we don't even have our first hypersonic missile ready. By the way, that's known as the Dark Eagle and is slated for deployment in Europe, I guess, sometime next year or the year after. Okay, this is a very short piece. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to give it to you, D. I forgot.
Okay. Okay. S- the CHASX-13 air-launched hypersonic ballistic missile. Hypersonic weapons. Yep. The U.S. is behind, and China, of course, is in the lead.
Way ahead.
China.
Yeah, China's way ahead.
Yes.
I mean, certainly way ahead of the U.S. Whether it's way ahead of Russia, I'm not sure, but it's way ahead of the U.S.
Exactly. China deployed the CHASX-13 hypersonic missile to its nuclear triad in 2025, marking a milestone in integrating hypersonic weapons in all its warfighting domains: land, sea, and air. In 2017, China became the first military in the world to deploy an operational hypersonic missile. The land-based Road Mobile DF-17, a TEL-launched Mach-10 hypersonic missile with an operational range between 1,800 and 2,500 kilometers. Since then, China has commissioned more land-based hypersonic missiles, e.g. DF-21D, DF-26, as well as ship-launched and submarine-launched hypersonic missile YJ-21. With the addition of the air-launched CHASX-13, hypersonic weapons are now deployed across all combat domains. Launched from the long-range H-6N bomber and with an estimated strike range of 3,000 kilometers, and I'd say the CHASX-13 enhances China's power projection well beyond the first and even the second island chain. Designed to strike both naval and land targets, its air-launched flexibility, always rapid deployment from unpredictable locations, bypassing static defenses. The missile
Just
is
to make something clear here, the range of the missile is 3,000 kilometers, which is 1,800 miles. But I'm not clear on what the range of the bomber is. I mean, it's a long range bomber.
Mhm.
Okay, if the bomber has a range of say 3,000 miles, and then uh, the missile is launched, from let's say 1,200 miles out. Uh,
Mhm.
uh, that's going to be enough distance to reach the United States.
Mhm.
Please go on.
The missile is nuclear and conventional dual capable, supporting both nuclear deterrence and conventional strikes. Key features of the weapon include two-stage, solid fuel ballistic design derived from the land-based DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missile, ASBM, but modified for aerial launch. equipped with hypersonic glide vehicle (HGV) similar to the DF-17, enabling evasive maneuvers and high precision at speeds exceeding Mach 16, Mach 6. Terminal speed at Mach 10 with estimated range around 3,000 kilometers when launched from the H-6N bomber. The H-6N bomber has a combat range of 3,500 kilometers without refueling and an extending range of 6,000 kilometers with mid-air refueling, far beyond the second island chain and enough to reach northern Australia. In summary, launched by H-6N bomber, the CHASX-13 has a theoretical strike range
Sorry.
of 9,000 kilometers from Chinese coast, making it a potent A2AD deterrence against ship or land targets that cannot be intercepted by existing air defense systems.
So 9,000 kilometers from the Chinese coast amounts to 5,400 miles from the Chinese coast. So, as I said, that can reach the United States.
Yeah, and Trump's running his big mouth against China and all.
Yeah. Okay, so that's quite a hypersonic weapon, and it's of course great interest that that was the final one that was needed to give them uh, land, sea, and air hypersonic weapons. I think that is truly impressive. Uh, okay, and that type of missile by itself is truly impressive, especially in combination with the bomber. Ooh, amazing. So let's take a look if there are any further comments about this one. No further comments. We are growing in attendance
Oh, good.
as we go through. I'm sorry about people who are coming in late who are missing this because I think the three articles together are really striking. Here's another very striking piece of equipment. This article by Wabin again, this time June 7th, introducing the Jiu Tian drone. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly in any way, but the Jiu Tian. That's probably better. Jiu Tian. Drone swarm carrier. A sci-fi level engineering marvel. China's new killer drone, not the Ukraine-Russia variety, but the true high-end technology for future unmanned air conflict. So, there are pictures of a drone mothership and a bunch of drones accompanying the mothership. The surprise Ukrainian attack on Russian strategic gas fields caused quite a bit of social media discussions in China. Two takeaways stand out. The daring and audacity of the Ukrainian attack. It indeed inflicted damage and embarrassment on the Russians, though the victory could well prove uh, Pyrrhic if Russia retaliates as expected. They have not yet actually retaliated. They seem to have two dimensions, to their retaliation. Uh, uh, One is retaliation for the attack on the bridges, and the Russians have been engaging, in that retaliation uh, uh, now already, subjecting Ukraine to what seems to be intending to be a week-long attack, to knock out decision-making centers and hunt people who might have been involved in the attack on the bridges. So that is going on now. But the other dimension of their retaliation is military, uh, and they haven't started that yet. They're still deciding what targets to retaliate against for the drone attack on the bombers, on the Russian bombers. That retaliation hasn't started yet. Uh, Going on with the article, 2, the low tech involved in the attack was laughable. If this is the leading edge of Western drone capabilities, it is going to have a major wake-up call in a true high-end conflict with China. As Western media breathlessly report the sophisticated quote-unquote surprise attack with FPV drones remotely launched from wooden cabins on top of lorry trucks, few of the reporters are even aware that BYD, China's EV maker, rolled out its Yang Wang U8 electric SUV in 2024 with a drone hangar mounted on the roof that can launch a DJI drone with the push of a button on a dashboard control screen. BYD is not alone in having such an EV/drone combo. Fang Chen Bao Bao SUV also comes with a drone in a roof hangar. The PLA Army has fielded lightweight uh, um, um, military utility vehicles with roof-launched drones near the India-China border for years, with both ISR and strike capabilities. Chinese social media has long posited that the Ukraine drone war is basically fought with consumer-grade parts, components, and software that anyone with a modest budget can source from a large electronics mall in the Huaqiang district of Shenzhen. And there's a link to that in Wikipedia, where you can get a variety of electronic goods from smartphones to drones to LIDAR. I gather LIDAR are radars. The 8th Drone World Congress 2024 in Shenzhen attracted over 2,000 drone makers from China and 470 from Shenzhen alone. Apart from the well-known aerial photography drones such as DJI and Hotel, many specialize in agricultural and industrial applications, firefighting and rescue, geological surveys, etc. As for military drones, China has developed a large arsenal of ISR and strike models such as the Rainbow series with the prefix CH, the GJ series of strike drones, and the WZ series of ISR strike drones, families of military drones that feature supersonic and even hypersonic speed. Hypersonic speed for drones, Jesus. Long endurance and high altitude. In my earlier articles on Substack, I have talked about the CHT-1 ground effect drone for aircraft carrier and land attacks. CH-9 AI-powered strike drone with a 10,000-kilometer range. The CH-5 long-range stealth bomber. The WZ-7 Soaring Dragon air-breathing hypersonic HALE UAV. with a 7,000-kilometer range and equipped with anti-ship ballistic and cruise missiles. WZ-9 Divine Eagle airborne early warning drone that flies at extreme high altitude, and most recently the incredible MD-19 Mach 9 hypersonic strike drone that can fly at an altitude that's near space, has an 8,000-kilometer range. What is that? 4,400-mile range, and can land on a standard type of runway. For the kind of drone swarm attack Ukraine launched on Russian airfields, China has just tested the new the Jitian or the Jichuan unmanned aircraft, now referred to in the military circle as the world's first, quote, drone mothership, unquote. With the introduction, okay, of Jiutian, meaning, quote, nine heavens, unquote, in Chinese, China has started an entirely new category of military aircraft, either manned, okay, or unmanned. Jiutian is designed as a high-altitude, long-endurance, that is HALE, UAV with a kilometer range of 7,000 kilometers and an operational altitude of 15,000 meters, and has the capacity to carry 100 small drones, which it can launch while airborne. It can alternatively carry a range of other precision-guided weapons, including cruise missiles and and loitering types of weapons. It is powered by a jet engine, has a 16-ton takeoff weight, and can carry 6 tons weight of drones or other types of ammunition. Its flight ceiling of 15,000 meters ensures its safe flight over most of the medium-range defense systems that are deployed worldwide. First unveiled at the Zhuhai Air Show in November 2024, Zhushan is intended to serve not only as a launch platform for drone swarms, but as a control node for the UAVs after they launch. No comparable aircraft are known to be developed anywhere in the world. Its payload of up to 100 units of loitering ammunition or small drones, including kamikaze UAVs, can be released from both sides of the belly of the aircraft, extending their reach. The longest Ukrainian drone attack happened 4,000 kilometers from its border with Russia. Zhuchan can fly almost twice the distance into enemy territory and release the drones right over the targets. In addition to its UAV carrier function, Zhuchan can carry a range of payloads on 8 weapon hardpoints. I'm not even sure what a weapon hardpoint is. And is capable of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assignments, as well as electronic warfare. It will serve as an AI-powered unmanned command hub that coordinates the drone swarm. As the first flying aircraft carrier in the world, Zhuchan has the potential to be followed into service by even larger drone carriers, deploying larger quantities of drones or larger drone classes. Zhuchan's development follows a broader trend towards China's drone industry, leading the world in introducing entirely new kinds of unmanned aerial vehicles for military use. In comparison to U.S. unmanned systems, while the RQ-4 Global Hawk surpasses Juchan in altitude and reconnaissance, it lacks strike capability. The MQ-9 Reaper offers strike and ISR flexibility, but is limited by a lower operational altitude and a 5-ton maximum takeoff weight. Of course, neither has the drone carrier capability that is defining feature of Juchan. As a unique new member of China's military drone family, Jushan is not just a technological marvel, it is a strategic asset in the military arsenal of China in future networked air combat situations or environments. The introduction of Jushan drone carrier marks a pivotal moment in military aviation history, poised to revolutionize air combat strategy for the 21st century. I guess my reaction to this one is our Air Force is just so totally behind the Chinese. I mean, this stuff is amazing. I don't know how anybody can read this stuff and even contemplate an attack on China, anytime in the future. It's simply ridiculous. And we have a tremendous amount of catching up to do.
We're too busy wasting money.
Too busy wasting money. Absolutely too busy wasting money. Steve Wolfbrand says the drones are getting crazy. Yeah. Other countries are simply developing the full capability of drones. It's just incredible.
And they've got to protect themselves. The, the U.S., you never know when a president gets in there and what they're going to do. Those words, bringing democracy around the world, are the scariest words. You don't want to hear that pertaining to your country.
I know you don't want to hear that. On the other hand, with the weapons that are being developed by Iran, by China, and by Russia, and of course they're going to trade their weapons, to one another. Uh, it's very dangerous for us to, threaten any of them. And as the years go by, they'll just get stronger and stronger. And unless we learn how to spend money in, a way that's, more economical and more effective,
Hmm.
uh, they will just, keep on building a lead in the high technology weapons area, and we won't be able to do anything about it. Now, at one level, this is probably good for peace because they don't seem to be interested in attacking anybody else. Okay, but on the other hand, sooner or later, when one side gets a huge weapon advantage over another side, uh, it tends to make the side that has the huge weapons advantage far more aggressive than it was originally. I may be being too pessimistic about that, but I view China and Russia and Iran as all peace loving nations right now,
Right.
2025. But if they build a huge advantage, over all others, I'm not sure how peace loving they'll be 20 to 25 years from now. But
Mm.
anyway,
And right now, Israel is still talking about attacking Iran.
um, I have to laugh at that. I
I
mean, I
know.
do. I just have to laugh at that. I think the Iranians are going to wipe the floor with the Israelis. The only advantage the Israelis seem to have, uh, is in sabotage operations of one kind or another. uh, their intelligence services are very, very good at at those, and you never know how effective they can be. Uh, okay, the Iranians though just did something. Uh, they evidently they penetrated, the capabilities of the Israelis, in uh, the nuclear war fighting area.
Hmm.
They're about to publish some key critical documents in that area, so everybody knows what the Israelis have.
Right. And they said that they would hit those if they were hit.
Yes, yes, if they were hit, they would certainly hit those, and they're going to hit those with hypersonic missiles,
Yes.
and there's going to be no defense for the Israelis. Steve Wolfbrand asked Stock, what was up with all those drones over New Jersey? Oh, I don't know. I haven't heard of bunches of drones over New Jersey. That's really interesting, Steve. I haven't heard from my friends who live in New Jersey. I got a few friends who live in Jersey. Okay, so let us move on at this point. Please share, like, and subscribe. There are a lot of people who have not come to the stream yet who really need to get wind of what we're doing tonight because I think it's really pretty big. But we've got a very interesting article coming up. Uh, and I believe it's your turn, D. It's by Alistair Crook.
Okay.
And there it is.
Alrighty. Let me enlarge my screen here. Okay, The Silence of the Bears. Alistair Crook, June 9th. The silence of the bears will soon be ended, and we will know more about Russian resolve. Mr. Cockroach himself.
Yeah, I know. Amazing. Okay, I'm sorry. I got distracted by the graphic.
Russia's leadership is in conclave determining its riposte. Trump has been silent for 2 days. Unprecedented. In the last 2 days, Ukraine and its facilitators attempted a massive attack on Russia's strategic nuclear bomber force, succeeded in collapsing 2 bridges onto civilian trains heading to Moscow, attacking the Kerch Bridge and assassinating a Russian general via explosive body bomb. As Clausewitz noted 2 centuries ago, the point of military force is to compel an outcome, that an adversary finally does what is wanted of him. Thus, in respect to military adventures, there is need for clarity of thought from the outset. It must have a realizable political objective that has a prospect to be implemented. What then was the objective behind these Ukrainian irregular attacks? One certainly was demonstrative PR exercises to say that Ukraine and allied services are still capable of mounting special forces style innovative operations and are therefore worthy of continued support, as Colonel Doug McGregor cautions. Quote, for the most part, it was a PR stunt to try and convey the impression that Ukraine is capable of carrying on the war. Anything you hear from the Western outlets are probably untrue or at least grossly exaggerated. We damaged ourselves and our relationship. What there is left of it with Moscow. That's the real fallout from this. Okay, but PR stunts are no strategy, nor do the attacks hold any prospect for a shift in the overall strategic military paradigm. It doesn't say that the West or Ukraine has suddenly discovered a political strategy towards Russia per se. That doesn't exist. For the most part, the innumerable Western declarations come as a hodgepodge of fantasies. The second objective, however, may indeed have had a clear strategic and end state, and has demonstrated feasibility and the possibility to compel a desired outcome. The various attacks have imposed on Trump the uncomfortable reality that he, as president, does not control U.S. foreign policy. The collective deep state has just made that plain. As General Mike Flynn has warned, quote, the deep state is now acting outside of the control of the elected leadership of our nation. These persons in our deep state are engaged in a deliberate effort to provoke Russia into a major confrontation with the West, including the United States. In effect, the likes of Generals Keith Kellogg and Jack Keane, with their adolescent narratives that only through pressure, more pressure, and pain will compel Putin, always presumed to be weak, to accept a frozen conflict in the hope that it can avert from an American defeat in Ukraine. The British during World War II similarly believed that the Nazi regime was not strong and could be overthrown by strategic bombing, intended to bring about the collapse of German society. Today, General Kellogg advocates bombing Russia with sanctions, mirroring the British conviction that such tactics must be made for morale. Trump's advice from his generals either did not meet the criterion of political realism because it was based on fantasies of incipient Russian collapse, and a hopeless misreading of Russia and its army. Or perhaps his advisors either inadvertently or deliberately shafted Trump and his agenda of normalizing relations with Russia. What will Trump say now to Putin? That he was indeed forewarned, recall his writings just days ago, that bad things, if it were not for me, I mean, really bad things would already have happened to Russia, and claim that his advisors did not give him the full details, or will he candidly admit that they deceived him? Alternatively, will he take the line that the CIA was merely operating to an old presidential finding that authorized attacks into the depths of Russian hinterland? All such punitive answers would spell one thing: that Trump is not in control, that he and his European allies, such as Britain, cannot be trusted.
Okay, so what's the further conclusion from that? The further conclusion is that uh, uh, from Russia's standpoint, if they're to maintain their own security, that can only be accomplished through a military victory and not through diplomacy. So that's the dangerous thing. Okay, what this attack has done is to strengthen the forces inside of Russia who do not want to negotiate, okay, but who only want to dictate unconditional surrender terms to Ukraine. So okay, I think that's what's going to happen because the President of the United States doesn't have control over his own government. So what he says to Putin cannot be trusted. And of course, all the governments of Europe are lying all over the place, so they cannot be trusted either. Please go on, Dee.
Okay. Either way, Trump's advisors will have understood that Zelensky and by extension his NATO enablers were exploiting the SALT START Treaty's vulnerability in order to use concealed drones hidden in civilian containers to attack the very bombers covered by USA-Russia treaties. Article 12 of the START Treaty specifically requires a display in the open of all heavy bombers within the airbase. This provision was a confidence-building act, visible monitoring to guard against a surprised first attack nuclear attack, or first strike nuclear attack. Start 1. Cut long-range or strategic nuclear arsenals by 30 to 40%. New starts slash accountable deploy strategic arms by another 3/4. In 2021, Presidents Biden and Putin extended New START until February 2026. Of course, these unidentified enablers understood the gravity of striking the strategic nuclear force of a major rival nuclear weapons power. How would the U.S. respond if an adversary, perhaps a non-state actor, launched a strike against strategic long-range nuclear-capable bombers in the USA using cheap and easily available drones hidden in containers? We are in a new era of risk, one in which pagers and cell phones can be weaponized as bombs, and of sleeper drones that can be remotely activated to attack airfields, either civilian or military. Larry Johnson has observed that after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, intended to destroy the U.S. aircraft carrier berths there, the Japanese Admiral Yamamoto reportedly said the following in the aftermath of Japan's great victory at Pearl Harbor: "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve. We have won a great tactical victory at Pearl Harbor and thereby lost the war. The silence of the bears will soon be ended, and we will know more about Russian resolve. But a relationship in which Trump is understood to mean what he says and does what he says likely is over. The Russians are furious. What happens next is unknown."
We should add that when he says the Russians, okay, are furious, he's not only saying that the leadership of Russia is furious, but he's also saying the Russian people are furious at the drone attacks,
Mm-hmm.
and that they are agitating for very, very strong retaliation from their leaders. And there are generals, okay, inside of Russia who have lately been threatening the leadership. Uh, okay, there's talk of coups being planned because Putin, they think, has been too soft. So, in this context, a furious retaliation campaign is now going on that we haven't seen before,
Hmm.
this war, full of drones and missiles, okay, and air attacks. And it's a campaign that is very effective also. Of course, on the ground, the Russians are attacking, okay, on all fronts. And what we next will consider is how close Ukraine is to collapse. And we have a couple of videos on that. But I also have to repeat again what I said before. So far, the retaliation of the Russians uh, has been widespread retaliation for the attack on the bridges
Right.
and on the civilian targets. But there hasn't been any attack yet in retaliation for the attack on the bombers. That is still coming and is being carefully considered by Putin, okay, and his inner circle. And you can be sure, well, one thing you can't be sure of is how far that retaliation is going to extend. There's been a lot of speculation, not speculation, okay, but analysis,
Mm-hmm.
is saying that uh, uh, the attack on the bombers was an operation that was put together some time ago by the CIA and by MI6. Um, but that, in the operational sense of late, it was the Ukrainians, okay, in MI6 who definitely had a hand. It is not clear that elements of the CIA were immediately involved, okay, in the current attacks, but the Russians are investigating that. And there is a division in the CIA that Scott Ritter frequently talks about. The name of it, okay, is Russia House. And that particular division is full of people who conduct operations in such a way that they are unaccountable to presidents. And they've been conducting these operations now for some time.
Mm-hmm.
Scott will be talking about that in the next section of our live stream. We have two new videos coming up. One is an interview that Scott Ritter had, with um, 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 uh, um, with Glenn Deason, okay, who's a Norwegian professor. Okay, and Scott was very effective in talking about the dangers involved, okay, in the end game, okay, in Ukraine, okay, that are coming up. In fact, he was brilliant in talking about it. And we will hear that, see that, and go over that, comment on it, okay, and analyze what he has to say. He also had another video um, on the Judging Freedom show. Uh, and he talks about some similar issues, but says some new things, okay, on that show. So I'm going to play both of the videos. One is 49 minutes of Scott, okay, and Glenn, and the other is roughly 33 minutes of Scott, and the judge. And we will be interrupting both videos from time to time with analysis, okay, and commentary. And it will probably take us to get through both of the videos a total of an hour and 3/4. So uh, I will now stop sharing the article from Alistair Crook, which of course was a very interesting article, I think.
Yes.
And we will now share the screen for the Glenn Deason and Scott Ritter video.
Intelligence officer in the US Marines and also a UN weapons inspector. So welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So for me, one of the absurdities of this whole proxy war in Ukraine is that the people who warned for the past 20 years that NATO expansion to Ukraine would result in its destruction. They were smeared as anti-Ukrainians for a reason, while the people who essentially condemned Ukraine to destruction by cheering on NATO expansion, then rejecting negotiations and insisting on keeping the fighting going, even after it's been effectively lost, they are somehow the pro-Ukrainian. So it's truly fantastic war propaganda we have seen. But we now appear to reach that end game, which many have predicted. That is, the front lines are cracking, Ukraine's casualties are going up, desertions are going up, and it's starting to look as if the complete collapse of the Ukrainian army could happen within the next few months. But even if it doesn't, it's nonetheless very quickly going from bad to worse. So I wanted to maybe start off by asking you, what do you see as being the main developments now shaping in Ukraine?
Hey, if you've been trying to remove this from your life so you can be more in alignment with what's inside of this book and you've continued to fail over and over, there's a really simple.
Sorry about the ads. I have no idea.
Well, I mean, this is something that I've been and others have been predicting since when the war expanded first in the fall of 2022. When Russia made the transition from phase one, which was that quick strike operation to compel Ukraine to the negotiating table, successfully, by the way. But then Ukraine rejected the peace that it had agreed to at the behest of these people that ostensibly care for Ukraine. I said we're transitioning into a conflict that is going to grind the Ukrainians down. Now, I will say that I had a much more optimistic timeline of how long it would take to grind Ukraine down, probably because I, like many other Western observers, didn't understand what a special military operation was. I come from a background that is premised upon war being comprised of actions designed to achieve total victory. The special military operation was not an action designed to achieve total victory. It was always a limited action that had a whole bunch of politics layered over it. And it therefore became difficult from a Western military perspective to comprehend what exactly Russia was doing, because from the Western trained mind, there were many missed opportunities. Things were allowed. Why is it in a nation that's supposed to be at war? Why can Western delegations travel via rail line to Kiev and enjoy a relatively unimpeded, sojourn in Kiev? Why does that train line still exist? Because I can guarantee you that if America was at war with Ukraine, that train line wouldn't exist.
I think that's a very important point, and I've always wondered about that too. Why is it possible for Western politicians and Western leaders just to take the train to Ukraine from Poland? Okay, and to get to Kiev and to talk to Zelensky and to plan all kinds of things that would be dangerous to Russia. And Russia never destroyed the rail line, in spite of its command of the air. The reason why that happened is because of the way Russia defined the SMO. In other words, they defined it as being confined to attacks on military targets. And I guess the railway wasn't considered a military target. That's it.
And any delegation that made its way to Kiev would probably have a one-way ticket. But that's not the way the Russians were working. So, the timeline was off, but the process, the military math is the same. Russia was going to engage in a war of attrition that would eventually reach a culminating point where Ukrainian resources could not be replenished. And then you will get a situation where eventually the military cohesion on the part of Ukraine cracks. And when it cracks, it's all over. Russia will then, be able to rapidly exploit it, because Russia will not run out of resources. That was the one thing that was a given up front that many people disagreed with, but it's the one thing that I and others were 100% correct on, that the Russian military machine would be able to outperform the Ukrainian military machine, even backed up by NATO, because Russia had deeper manpower resources. Russia had military industry that was readily mobilized, as opposed to the West, which still hasn't mobilized. and eventually Ukraine would just run out of resources, and that's where we are today.
That's a hugely important point. The Russians mobilized to fight this war. Their industry was placed in service, okay, of the war. But we have been doing business as usual here. And the European countries, have been doing business as usual also. And we have not been matching in any sense the war production, okay, of Russia. And what we give in support and have given in support, okay, to Ukraine has been nowhere near the equal of the support that Russian industry has given to Russian troops, okay, in this war. That's a big reason why Russia has been winning.
Russia also fooled everybody because they didn't engage in Bakhmut style, meat grinder tactics where both sides were getting ground up. I mean, Bakhmut was a bloodbath for both sides. The Russians lost a significant number of people because primarily it wasn't a Russian Ministry of Defense operation. It was a Wagner operation. And Wagner had access to manpower pools in terms of prisoners that were disposable. And they disposed of them in very bloody frontal assault tactics in an urban environment. That's not how the Russian Ministry of Defense works. And the Russian Ministry of Defense is actually under, I believe, political pressure to reduce the number of Russian casualties. So the tactics evolved to achieve the defeat of the Ukrainian military using meat grinder tactics that were decidedly one-sided in what was getting ground up. What we see today is the Ukrainians suffering horrendous casualties because Russia has mastered the nature of this conflict. It was interesting. There was an interview given recently by a member of the 3rd Assault Brigade, which is the new name for the Azov Brigade. These are the Nazis. These are the Banderas. These are the true believers in the cause. These are people who have actually acquitted themselves well militarily on the battlefield. When they have been committed to certain fronts, they have caused the Russian advance to stop. And the reason why is that they were able to employ not just motivated troops, but also drone swarms. I mean, the big Ukrainian advancement in this war has been their ability to deploy significant quantities of drones, especially these FPV, first-person view suicide drones, and use them as, battlefield fire support. And when the Ukrainians would throw these drones in the battlefield, the Russians...
You've noticed how they hold their phones differently now, haven't you? The celebrities, the tech executives, the medical professionals
were ground to a halt because they couldn't move or else they'd be hit. And so the Russians would have to then divert their resources to other parts and seek to, outflank, and they had great success that way. But what this person said is, we can't do that anymore because the moment we start to employ our drones, the Russians kill all of our drone operators. See, the Russians have broken the code on how Ukraine uses drones, and they go after the source. And they kill the drone operators, suppress them, which means the drone operators have to withdraw, which means there's no longer drone coverage, which means the Russians come in with their drones and their fire support, and then their unique tactics, and they are able to push back the Ukrainians at great loss to the Ukrainians. And that's what's happening today across the field. The Ukrainians enjoy no advantages whatsoever, none.
We in the West, other than the Ukrainians, have never fought a drone war. Our troops have never been involved in a drone war. We have no idea how they would perform, inside of a drone war. That goes for the troops in Europe. It goes for the American troops. It goes for the Israeli army, the IDF. we don't know how the armed forces that we are allied with are going to perform, okay, in such a war. They have no experience in it.
There's no advantage that Ukraine brings to the battlefield. Russia has advantages everywhere, and Russia has accumulated enough resources so that it is able to maintain this pressure of battlefield superiority and supremacy across the entire line of contact, so that the pressure is continuous, which means Ukrainians can't even pull units off of a lesser used part of the front to send them over as a fire brigade to reinforce an area where there's a breakthrough. They can't, because if they withdraw, the pressure breaks through, and there aren't any reserves. This is going to, the Ukrainian incursion into Kursk, because you could go down the history, as one of the most strategically foolish moves ever made, because Ukraine threw away 70 to 80,000 well-equipped, well-trained reserves who would have had a dramatic impact on the battle ongoing in the Donbass right now. But because those reserves were sent to Kursk and those are destroyed, not only do they not have the reserves to deal with that, but now as Russia expands the battlefield into Sumy, there aren't sufficient Ukrainian troops to deal with that. As Russia breaks through into Dnipropetrovsk, there is no Ukrainian reserve to build a second line of defense. We are seeing the collapse of the Ukrainian defensive cohesion, and with that will come a couple other things. I predicted again that there would be military collapse, there would be economic collapse, there would be social collapse, and ultimately it would lead to political collapse. And that will be how you define that. We're seeing collapse on all of those fronts right now. We're seeing the military collapse. We're seeing the economy is non-functional. They just went into default. They can't afford to pay the price of compensation to families for 6,000 corpses. Russia has another 40,000 in the freezers. There's no money left. There's no ammunition left. There's no air defense left, which means Russia's getting dominated, which means that the will of society to continue to resist is collapsing. And there's already talk in Ukraine now to get rid of Zelensky, replace him with the Speaker of the Parliament, who that person will not be allowed to survive too.
What's really going on with Doge? I'm recording this message from the epicenter of America's new economic.
I did.
Okay, let's keep in mind that the reason for the attack, the invasion of Kursk, by the Ukrainians, the reason why they did this militarily stupid thing that resulted in the loss of 60 to 80,000 of their best troops was because they were seeking a propaganda victory to persuade the West and the United States in particular to continue the war. They put the narrative above the needs of their military. And now they're at the brink of collapse, in large measure because they did that.
An interview with a Russian writer and political scientist recently, and he I think Dmitry Vedran was his name, and he said that the solution here is tragically that to achieve denazification and demilitarization, which are two of the principal goals of Russia in this conflict, that you're not going to get that at the negotiating table because the Banderists, the Nazis, aren't willing to negotiate. And Russia is not going to give them what they need to survive. Russia denazification means they're gone. Demilitarization means that's gone. So the solution is that the conflict is going to burn itself out. And that's what's happening right now, is that the Russians are simply burning out the problem. And it will lead to the total destruction of Ukraine. And that's the direction we're headed right now.
So that's the prediction by Scott of what's going to happen. The conflict is going to burn out. Ukraine, is going to collapse. What will come after? Well, we'll be considering that as we move along.
Well, I've also heard from the Ukrainian side that the setback with their drones is now having a huge impact in all areas on the battlefield, and I guess a good indication of what you mentioned, the inability to relocate troops to weaker areas was quite evident by what happened when they shifted some of the troops away from Sumy, how quickly things began to fall away. So this is not really maybe in the Western media, but otherwise it's not a secret anymore that things are going very bad. One key theme, though, over the past 3 years has been whenever things go from bad to worse, we tend to escalate. That is, we start sending tanks and HIMARS, F-16s, and the most recent thing, which took me also by surprise, was this attack on Russia's nuclear deterrent. This goes a bit beyond my comprehension how they could do something as reckless as this, not just escalating the war in a dramatic way, but this could have very unforeseen consequences. Indeed, I'm not sure if we've seen fully yet how the Russians intend to respond, but arms controls treaty, I mean, across the board, it's going to have a lot of ramifications. What do you think will be the consequences of this last round of escalation?
The strategic defeat of Ukraine and the strategic defeat of NATO and the strategic defeat of the European Union. And the question is, does the United States want to be strategically defeated as well, or do we want to separate? Now, when we say strategic defeat,
Hey, it's John. And before you skip this ad, did you see that a self-proclaimed MAGA warrior
because war is an extension of politics by other means, to defeat NATO means you have to politically destroy NATO. It doesn't mean the military defeat. It means NATO can no longer continue to exist as a cohesive military alliance. It fractures, the collapse of NATO. That's what's happening right now because of NATO's decision to double down on Russia, to make Russia the enemy. The European Union, likewise, has deep fractures in it right now because of their insistence on not solving the problems inherent to the Union today, within the Union, but to try and find an external enemy upon which they can, continue to achieve growth. The Russians now have made a commitment. I think there was a period of time.
What he's referring to there is the attempt of the EU to achieve growth by now taking on military spending in order to help, with the Ukraine war. And it seems as though the leaders of the EU are thinking that if they carry on, the military spending, that's going to have a beneficial effect on the economy of the EU nations. But the EU is terribly divided over this, and I agree with Scott. We might be looking at the collapse of the EU.
I think there was a window of opportunity in the summer of last year where Vladimir Putin came out and said, look, I'm willing to negotiate, but it's going to be Istanbul Communique 2.0. It's going to be that deal updated to reflect present realities. And those present realities were almost exclusively linked to recognition of Novorossiya, of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Lugansk as being part of Russia, and Crimea as well. But Ukraine would continue to survive. And had they taken advantage of that, the Zelensky government would probably have been able to survive, or some derivative thereof. Because I think Russia was looking for an end to this conflict. They hadn't yet made the political decision that Russia now is committed to a open-ended conflict that only has one outcome. I think in June of 2024, Russia was ready to make a deal that gave it most of what it wanted, but not all of what it wanted. I think that window is shut, is gone. I think that the Russians now have recognized the Zelensky government for what it is, a terrorist organization, and that there can be no coexistence, peaceful or otherwise, that it must be destroyed. And Russia is on a pathway of achieving that destruction. And if NATO chooses to commit its resources, Russia will chew up those resources and politically defeat NATO. And if the European wants to join in, Russia will defeat them as well. And the question is, does America want to throw its hat into that ring? And that's why Russia continues to have opening with the United States and hope of keeping America out of this mess. But I think Russia has made a strategic decision that while they may not yet call it a war with Ukraine, they are at war with Ukraine, and therefore there will be gloves off on strike options. So I talked to you earlier about how, as a Marine, there were things that I would have done, having plan and execute a strategic air campaign against Iraq in 1991. I know what it takes to destroy a nation state. Russia has not been doing that to Ukraine. I think we're seeing Russia beginning to do just that. And I don't believe that this escalation is over. You know, when Russia was confronted with the Ukrainian decision and the NATO decision to continue the war in the fall of 2022, on the ground, Russia sought to stabilize the front with the Surovikin line and 300,000 mobilized troops, etc. But while they were stabilizing the line, Russia initiated a strategic air campaign that most people aren't familiar with. It's something that, you know, I'd love to be able to write a book about it someday, but somebody will beat me to it probably with better resources and all that. But the history of how Russia destroyed Ukraine's integrated air defense network, a NATO-provided network with some of the most advanced weapons and best intelligence queuing imaginable, how Russia defeated this. And that's a campaign that's been ongoing. Russia has annihilated the Ukrainian air defenses to the extent that today Ukraine is all but it's not defended in NATO, but this means that they've stripped NATO's air defense as well. I mean, Germany today is talking about the speculation. What if Russia attacks Germany? I think there was an article that was written in today, and it talks about, you know, basically Germany only has enough air defense to defend Berlin, that the rest of Germany is literally defenseless against a Russian attack, which means all of the industrial sites in Dusseldorf and et cetera, you know, affiliated with Rheinmetall and the development of the Taurus missile, they will be destroyed. And there's nothing Germany can do to stop it. And to be frank, Germany can't even defend Berlin because the resources allocated to the defense of Berlin match the resources that the world has given to Ukraine to defend Kiev, and those are insufficient. Russia has developed tactics and tools that can overcome the Western air defenses. Germany is.
Let's say something about that here. When Russia started the SMO, okay, even though they had in mind, a war of attrition. Well, at first, you know, they didn't even have in mind a war of attrition. Their objective was to get, you know, Ukraine to the conference table. They got them to the conference table, but then Boris Johnson came flying in and torpedoed the whole agreement. You know, that was worked out. So then Russia adapted the SMO into a war of attrition. Okay. I think their intention at first, okay, in the war of attrition, okay, was to accomplish their main objectives in the war, which were the neutralization of Ukraine, the demilitarization of Ukraine, and the denazification, okay, of Ukraine. And that was their idea. But as the war wore on, I think the Russians observed, I think they learned, and I don't think we learned, even though it was happening to us, that their war of attrition was not only being fought against the Ukrainians, but was being fought against the whole of the collective West. Because as the war went on, the Russian war of attrition was draining our military equipment, our military capabilities. When I say our now, I'm referring to the collective West, including the United States. All the preparedness that we had put forward in the normal course of things, eventually thrown in uh, p- to aid the Ukrainians and also the Israelis in their genocide in Gaza. And we are now very, very short of military equipment and capability in all areas because of of what we've done,
Mm-hmm.
and because of the fact that we haven't seriously mobilized our industrial capacity, to serve military objectives. Okay, now I'm glad that we haven't done that, because I think the Russians were in the right on this. Okay, and we were in the wrong, and are in the wrong in both places, in all the places we're intervening right now. Okay, but at the same time, from a purely military standpoint, uh, I think because of the ideology of neoliberalism uh, and the priorities it sets upon a society, we were in no position to back the Ukrainians up in an extended war of attrition inside, okay, of Ukraine. And that's why we're in the situation where we did not have the will to fight the war that had to be fought there. The Russians did have the will, and they've used the war of attrition not only to strip the Ukrainians of capability, but to strip us of capability as well. And again, here, when I say us, I mean the collective West. Okay, uh, so I didn't want to say that. I very much agree with everything that Scott is saying here. It's a brilliant analysis of what has happened in the war and what the current situation is.
Defenseless against Russia, and that means that Europe is defenseless against Russia. That's the reality. That Europe and the EU have gotten themselves to a position where um, they have committed to a strategic direction designed to defeat Russia, but all they've done is expose themselves to the inevitability of their collapse. Um,
I also thought that was a very, very important point, okay, that Scott was making. The idea that the air defense system in Germany is only sufficient, for the protection, okay, of Berlin. I mean, that's astonishing. How could the Germans have gone along with the United States and Ukraine to such a degree that they denuded themselves of all protection? I mean, that is policy and military incompetence. And that relates to the other nations of Western Europe also, like the other nations of Europe, all of them. Uh, they're in no position to defend themselves against the Russian attack. I think they're very lucky that uh, these days the Russians have no ambitions uh, to go on wars of conquest in Europe. Their motivation is to get rid of the Ukraine threat, and that's about it. After that, I think all they want is to do business and to develop the parts of the Eurasian continent that are falling within the Russian uh, uh, sphere. What's out of the Russian sphere, I think the Russians have the idea, you guys can go to hell. We don't really care. Going on.
and the way that Europe is progressing with this expansion and, as you call it, escalation, is such that they are making it impossible to
Mr. Wonderful here. My friend Howard Marks is the co-founder of Activision, the gaming giant that was just
quantify any escalation of the conflict as an Article 5 issue. I mean, Germany is not seeking the permission of NATO to give Russia advanced missile technology, which means this is a unilateral German action, similar in many ways to the Turkish decision to intervene in Syria. And you know what happened when Russia responded, attacking a Turkish column, killing Turkish troops. Turkey said, whoa, we want Article 4 to kick in, maybe Article 5. And NATO went, no, you're on your own. You're on your own. You did this on your own. Germany, what Germany's doing is on their own. It's not approved NATO actions. NATO's not there to protect Germany. The European Union is seeking to do things that it can't back up because it doesn't have an Article 5. So they've delinked European Union activities from NATO activities. Europe is setting itself up for an absolute disaster because if they continue to escalate, as you said, they don't have the means to sustain that escalation or back it up. Russia has the means to deflect that escalation and destroy it. And if that's the direction we want to go, then the United States is going to be compelled to ask the question, do we want to jump in here and risk losing Boston, Baltimore, Los Angeles, although given the riots, we may be willing to write off Los Angeles. But how many American cities are willing to lose on behalf of Dusseldorf? And the answer is none. None. This is a problem that Europe has made for itself. And the solution is with Europe, and Europe doesn't have the means of coming up with a solution. So I think the Russians are committed right now to winning this thing. The good news is Russia doesn't want to attack Germany. Russia doesn't want to attack Poland. Russia doesn't want to attack Europe. Russia simply wants a resolution to the problem in Ukraine. And right now, I think Russia recognizes that the only way they achieve that is through the unconditional surrender of Ukraine, which comes from the total defeat of Ukraine at the hands of the Russian military.
Well, you mentioned the United States. Well, the question is whether or not they will sit this one out. But with these attacks, though, on Russia's nuclear deterrent, do you see any possibility that the United States had no involvement at all? And if the US was involved, could it be that it was only the security agencies and Trump himself didn't know? Or is this also, again, it becomes a lot of speculation. So just as given that we're not sitting on any information, but it's just hard to imagine something like this being pulled out with at least assistance of U.S. intelligence agencies, if not assistance, even not even the knowledge. It's starting to sound very unlikely, though. But if Trump's not involved, I mean, from the first administration, it did appear that he was often sidelined on some key issues. But again, this is more your field, so I was wondering what your thoughts were.
Well, I start with the presumption based upon observable factors that the Trump administration is a dysfunctional administration when it comes to Russian policy, Ukrainian policy, and in many ways national security policy. Normally, to be a functional administration, you need to have a systemic approach to build policy from the ground up. So normally you'll get policy direction from the executive, the president, and then the national security advisor will hold a meeting where he'll farm out tasks to the different agencies who will then break it down into interagency groups who begin the process of building consensus on, can they execute this? If not, what needs to be done to make it a policy that can be executed, then how they will execute it. Then that works its way up through various meetings. You have small interagency groups, larger interagency groups. You have the deputies meeting, the National Security Council. Then you have the principals meeting, and they present it to the president as final cohesive, consensus-driven policy. This administration doesn't work that way at all. We don't even have a national security advisor right now. We have a Secretary of State who's dual-hatted, and he can't do both jobs, and he's not doing the national security advisor job, which means the National Security Council is not functioning, which means what we're happening is the president acting on a whim or on advice whispered into his ear. That advice hasn't been thoroughly staffed out. The example of this is Golden Dome. Golden Dome is a missile defense brainchild that's foisted on him by people that Pete Hegseth and others. It hasn't been farmed out and looked at. It can't work. Talk to Theodore Postal. He will tell you it can't work. Can't work on the budget. 150 billion. Now you're talking close to $4 trillion, and it still won't work. Just so people are like, well, Scott, you're very pessimistic. I don't know. I've been following this for a little while. I grew up in the age of the Cold War, and I watched how Safeguard was supposed to defend, but we couldn't do Safeguard. We dumped Safeguard. Now, for me, that was an academic exercise because I was too young to live through it as as somebody who was involved, but studying Safeguard,
Mhm.
you realize that missile defense just can't work. There's always something that will overcome Safeguard. Doesn't matter how many bases we build, how many Sprint missiles or Spartan missiles we build. The Russian response was either large missiles with multiple, reentry vehicles, independently targeted, which would overwhelm the system, or FOBs, a fractional orbit bombardment system, meaning you put a missile into orbit and it comes out in a trajectory that can't be tracked ballistically, and they strike the target. The Russians had the solution. We didn't have the money to build these, so we wisely signed the anti-ballistic missile treaty, saying mutually assured destruction is our safest bet. Donald Trump then, or not Donald Trump, Ronald Reagan then said, no, 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 no. I believe in disarmament, but we're going to have strategic defense initiative. Brilliant Pebbles, Star Wars.
Do you want to know where to invest $1,000 right now? Well, forget about AI, quantum computing, electric vehicles, crypto.
Didn't work, couldn't afford it. So it broke down and became the ballistic missile defense, scheme or organization under Bush. 9/11 came. Bush said, we got to get a missile defense shield in. The reality is we didn't have technology that worked, so we made it up. We simply fabricated something out of nothing, created the ground-based interceptor. It doesn't work. The idea of a bullet hitting a bullet doesn't work because we've never successfully tested it. We don't have a bullet hit a bullet. We have a bullet hit a balloon. We have a bullet hit a target that's been painted and built specifically to be, and even then we miss it most of the time.
So we are looking right now at a tour de force on the part of Scott. His analysis of ABM technology and the failures of ABM technology for a period of years. I should say not only the failures, but the folly of what we attempted to do in the ABM area since the 1980s. How much money we foolishly spent on it, and the fact that it doesn't work. It just does not work. Let's continue.
What we call missile defense today doesn't work. Everything the Russians possess can overcome the missile defense that we currently have. So now what are we going to do? Come up with the Golden Dome, which is a missile defense system predicated on technology that doesn't exist, hasn't been tested. And when it does talk about using existing technology, it's using technology that doesn't work. That's the product of dysfunctional national security team. This should never have made it to the president's desk. The president should never have been given an opportunity to comment on this because it's not properly staffed policy. It is pie in the sky nonsense from a handful of people who just skipped echelon in terms of developing the idea and put it on the president's desk.
Okay, and the president loves the idea because, after all, from his point of view,
Mhm.
it's a marketing thing. It's a narrative. We're building the Golden Dome. Okay, Trump has, of course, as you know, a tremendous fixation on gold this, gold that, gold the other thing, gold surrounding him, gold everywhere. So now he wants to do the Golden Dome. But what Scott's pointing out is there's no staffing consideration behind the idea of the Golden Dome because Trump has not properly constituted a staff to back him up and produce the knowledge he needs, in the ABM area as well, in the missile defense area, as well. His people don't really know anything about it. So they present him with a half-baked idea, with a title that he's going to say, oh, wonderful, wonderful, I can do something else that's golden. And so there you have it. So he's trying to sell something to the American people that's going to cost a fortune, that's going to enrich our defense companies, but that's not going to work.
That's the world we live in. So now we come back and talk about, what happened. As you pointed out, during Donald Trump's first term, he approved hundreds of millions of dollars of defense aid to Ukraine. That defense aid was attached to a strategic.
That's the point which most people do not recognize either. they look at the Ukraine war as Biden's war, because Biden, of course, supported Ukraine at the time of the invasion, of Russia, and before Biden supported the buildup of the military. But Trump's role in supporting the buildup of the Ukrainian military is relatively unknown and is forgotten. And here's Scott telling us about that.
Strategic policy direction. One that was also attached, for instance, for having the CIA build 20 bases on Ukrainian soil. For what purpose? Peaceful.
20 CIA bases
Mhm.
on Ukrainian soil. That was before Biden that the 20 bases were established on Ukraine soil. It was going on from 2014 right up to the start of the war, 2022. And Trump was as responsible for it as anybody.
Coexistence? Were these 20 CIA bases there to hold hands with the Russians and sing Kumbaya? No, it's part of a strategic policy direction to achieve the strategic defeat of Russia, strategic defeat defined as the collapse of the Putin government. That's what it is. It's about creating the conditions economically, politically, etc., that brings about a collapse of the Putin government. That was the
Not just the Putin government, but the Russian Federation itself. The objective was to collapse the Russian Federation itself and put in a puppet government that would be friendly to the looting of the mineral wealth of Russia by American corporations. That was the objective.
strategic direction under the Obama administration once the Russian reset failed. Remember, we had the Russian reset. That was really regime change operation designed to put Dmitry Medvedev in place and keep Vladimir Putin out. That's all it was. It wasn't about better relations. It was about keeping Putin out. When that failed, Putin came back 2012. It changed into regime change. And the CIA doubled down on working with opposition leaders, et cetera. There's a reason why Russia kicked out all of the NGOs, Western funded NGOs, because they were fronts for the CIA trying to achieve, domestic unrest to collapse the Russian government.
So, of course, our narrative concerning Russia throwing the NGOs out is that Russia was anti-democracy, and Putin was anti-democracy, and he was getting rid of the NGOs because they were trying to establish a democracy in Russia. But from Putin's point of view and from Russia's point of view, he was getting rid of the NGO because they were attempting regime change in Russia. So there are two sides to that story. But here in America, we never hear the regime change side of the story, except when people such as Scott start to tell us about that.
That was the policy inherited by Donald Trump. He never changed the policy. In fact, they expanded on the policy in Ukraine, talking about bringing NATO to Ukraine. He can say that there was a stupid idea. Well, then why didn't you shut it down when you were president? Well, one, he didn't have the vision, and two, as you said, he was being stabbed in the back by a national security team that was more loyal to the deep state than they were to Donald Trump. But now he has this. Joe Biden took the same policy, expanded upon it through the conflict in Ukraine, and now Trump has inherited it. Ask yourself the following question: has Trump publicly shut down this national security policy of the United States? Has Trump come out and signed an executive order that said it is no longer the policy of the United States to achieve the strategic defeat of Russia? And the answer is no.
Why is Amazon paying me $63,000 a month? Well, I didn't make this kind of money.
It's not. Has Trump shut down the 20 CIA bases in Ukraine? Because we don't know, because the funding is black. It's hidden. We don't know. But the answer is no, he hasn't. He hasn't signed a finding to reverse this because he's a businessman and this is leverage. You don't want to give up all your tools until we have a deal. So what he's done is kept the same tools on the table whose job it is to bring down the Russian government. And they work closely with people like MI6, British Secret Intelligence Service, who has a far more aggressive posture with the Ukrainians against Russia than the United States. Even the United States does. MI6 is actively involved in carrying out direct action operations against Russian strategic targets. This attack on the Russian air bases, I believe, was conceived in a certain green-tinted glass-covered building in London, where home of the Secret Intelligence Service. But the president, I'm not saying the president ordered this. Fact is, I'm fairly convinced the president not only didn't order this, but he wasn't knowledgeable of this. That the president has built an echelon around him that are committed to dialogue, committed to diplomatic engagement, etc. Underneath that is the soft power people. Scott Bessent talking about sanctions, Graham talking about sanctions. The team that he never has contact with is the hard power people, the covert action people, the direct action people. Why? Well, one, because they are designed to be deniable, covert. Two, they are not being forthright with the members of the Trump cabinet who should be advising them. I don't believe that Radcliffe, the CIA director, is fully cognizant of what Russia House is doing. I know Tulsi Gabbard isn't cognizant of what they're doing. You know, you remember the name Gina Haspel. Gina Haspel was former director of the CIA, but she came up through the ranks of the director of operations. I mean, it's called Bloody Gina. She ran a base during the global war on terror that carried out torture. And then she lied and covered up there. I mean, she's your classic CIA operative. So you'd think when she became director that she'd be cool with what Russia House was doing. She said what Russia House is doing is a danger to the United States. Gina Haspel, an insider who has earned the trust of the CIA, could not bring Russia House under control. They would not talk to her. They would.
Now, that is a really amazing fact, because Gina Haspel is known as being one tough cookie. She really had well, you might consider that a terrible reputation. She was greatly feared in the government because of her involvement in torture programs. But she was a very tough individual, very used to getting her way. And the idea that she wasn't able, even as director of the CIA, to penetrate what they were doing in Russia House
Mm-hmm.
is truly amazing, that she wasn't able to get there. And if she wasn't able to get there, you have to wonder whether it's possible for Ratcliffe, who's presently the director of the CIA, to get in there and to control what Russia House is doing. And you wonder if there's anybody who could get in there. Well, I mean, I think you have to have someone with the authority to, end Russia House altogether and get rid of all its operatives.
Not brief her. They kept their work secret from her. The director of the CIA, who is responsible then, briefing the DNI, who briefs the president. Russia House is a rogue entity, out of control, carrying out operations against Russia designed to bring down the Russian government. And until they're ordered to stand down, they will continue that operation, to include facilitating the work of the British, helping the Ukrainians to strike strategic bombers. Remember, this isn't the first time. Ingalls Air Base was struck by a Ukrainian special forces team trained by the CIA. Trained by the CIA. I'm not saying directed by the CIA. I'm saying trained by the CIA for that operation. So I believe what's happening here is that there is a policy that's
the meniscus in your knee. It's this cartilage cushion
Lots
right
of
here.
activists.
out of control because it's on full automatic. A policy of regime change in Russia that the British are running, that was facilitated by the Americans, and Americans are cognizant of it, but the ones who are cognizant of it support it. Therefore, they're not going to brief it to their leadership. I mean, if you have a finding, or if I was told by my mom, Scott, you're allowed to play, baseball until 9:00 at night. Now, I know we're getting into the school season. I know that schools come up, but my mom hasn't changed that order. And so I'm going to go continue to play baseball until 9:00 at night, even though I know that my mom wants me home at dinner at 6:00, because she hasn't told me I can't. Trump has not told the CIA they can't do this. I don't believe Trump is aware of what the CIA is doing. And I believe that those people who are in government who know what they're doing don't want Trump to change the order, because they want Vladimir Putin to fall. This is a very dangerous situation because it has crossed the red lines of Russia's nuclear doctrine. The attack on the Russian strategic nuclear forces by the Ukrainians can only have been done with the assistance of foreign intelligence. As I said, most likely the British, probably some American help. But this meets the guidelines set forth in the doctrine that says if a non-nuclear state attacks Russia's strategic nuclear infrastructure with the assistance of a nuclear state, that Russia is allowed to assume that this is a precursor preemptive strike by the nuclear state and respond with nuclear weapons against not only the non-nuclear state, but the nuclear state. I mean, that's it. So, yeah, we should all be dead right now. If Russia followed its nuclear doctrine, we should all be dead. Thank God we have responsible Russian leadership. But, this is a very, very dangerous situation that I think Donald Trump is only now becoming aware of. This is why you see almost passivity on his part in terms of the Russian response. He said Russia's going to hit him hard, but Ukraine brought it on themselves by carrying out this action. I don't think Donald Trump is taking responsibility. I don't think Donald Trump is saying, no, well, we're to blame for this because we trained them, we gave them the green light, and I haven't really hit the red light just yet.
But with all of this recent escalation, what do you see happening to the peace negotiations? Because it seems to me the Russian position has hardened while, well, at least Ukraine and the Europeans are not seemingly willing to move. Is it just for show now, or is there some incremental movement towards at least a common format?
I think the Russians are not going to be the ones to walk away from this agreement. They have said. I mean, Russia's put its position down. It's known to Trump. Putin briefed Trump on the position. Trump knows the Russian position. But what the Russians have said is we will continue this process. And they proved it by showing up in Istanbul for the second round. And they proved it by continuing to act out on initiatives that came from the second round, the return of dead bodies, the return of prisoners, etc. And Russia has said it's willing to, talk about organizing a third round of negotiations. It's Ukraine that's saying hell no. Ukraine's saying we can't do any of this. We can't support this. We can't do any of that.
So Russia is open to negotiations, open to talks. I don't think it's open to changing the positions it's taking. But it is open to talks. It's Ukraine that has said no talks. We're fighting until the end. So where does that leave up the Russians? It leaves them in a position where they can do little else except to win the war and impose terms of unconditional surrender on the Ukrainians. That's where we're sitting at this point. And I think that that's the end game, right now.
Reject all of it. It's Europe that's backing up Ukraine. So now from the American perspective, it's the Europeans and Ukrainians that are sabotaging the peace negotiation, which is exactly the perception that Russia wants to further. Because a decision point will come for the President of the United States where he will distance himself from this negotiating process. And the question is, who's he going to blame for this political defeat? And right now, the Russians want him to blame the Ukrainians and the Europeans, and it appears that that's the direction the president's leaning. This is a conflict that will not be solved at the negotiating table. The Ukrainian behavior, the Ukrainian conduct, and the conduct of Europe and its NATO allies is such that Russia, I believe, has no faith in any of those parties from being responsible partners for peace. So Russia now is committed to a path of achieving, victory through war. And it's rapidly happening. It's rapidly happening on the battlefield right now. And I think you're going to see the rapid political collapse of Zelensky. There's talk that there's already move inside Ukraine to oust him because he is no longer a useful tool of anybody. He's become a problem for everybody. But I also see that there's nothing that Europe can do to end this. I mean, the Russians appear to have taken the gloves off. There was a strike the other day in Tornapil, I think, name of the city, that allegedly hit a bunker, a weapons storage facility that contained 56 Patriot missiles at a time when Ukraine is saying we're out of Patriot missiles, we need more. Well, 56 of them just blew up. A whole bunch of Storm Shadows, a whole bunch of ATACMS, all the missiles that Ukraine needs to continue this war. They were all blown up. And I think Russia's blowing up ships that have that stuff on it. Nothing's coming into Ukraine now. It's all getting destroyed. The Russians have taken the gloves off. And like I said, I do believe that Russians haven't even come close to. This is like.
Many of the world's richest entrepreneurs are quitting alcohol and they're spending their money on luxury cars and.
I don't know if you've been to the United States during 4th of July, but it's pretty cool. We put on these nice fireworks demonstrations. But, you know, in Europe, you do them as well. And they always start off with, you know, poof, poof, poof. And everybody's like, oh, and then boom, 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 boom. And everybody's, oh, cool. Ba, 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 ba. And they take you through this lull. And then in the end, you get the grand finale. The whole sky lights up for a brilliant flash of thunderous lights. I believe, in the first couple phases of the Russian fireworks show. We're not even halfway there yet. They haven't hit the mid part, but there will be a finale, and it's going to be terrible. It's going to be beyond imagination. In the West, we can't even begin to imagine this. The Russians are building up to a finale that will, I believe, incorporate new weapons, not just Russian, but new weapons. Why? Well, you just had a Russian, I think it was Rybkov, maybe somebody else, who said, you know, we've been warning the West about INF and the danger of walking away from INF, intermediate nuclear forces. He said that the Russians had sort of put self-limitations on them. He said, you are about to find out why you shouldn't have walked away from it, that you're going to see the impact of your refusal to work with us. We're going to lift the moratorium. And when we do, I think you're going to see weapon systems be exposed that, again, it won't be nuclear, but it will be devastating, sending a signal, because we get back to the gist of your question. From the Russian perspective, what the Ukrainians did was very dangerous strategically. How could the Russians have to operate in the future, especially if the British were involved, that Ukraine could be used as a conventional initiation of a larger preemption that could involve strategic nuclear forces from Great Britain and France, that has threatened to use them as well. So do you ride out the next round of Ukrainian provocations against your strategic nuclear forces and just say, well, we're hoping that this isn't it? Because if you gamble wrong and the Brits unleash Triton on a reduced trajectory, Russia's got a problem. So Russia has to send a signal that reasserts deterrence. The West must be deterred from this, must be deterred from ever allowing Ukraine to do this again. And you can only do that by escalating, by putting something new on the table. And that's why I believe that this grand finale is going to include a new generation of weapons that will send the signal to the West that your entire continent is now under risk. That's why we signed the INF Treaty. It was my baby. And I went to Russia to participate in a process that got rid of SS-20 missiles, SS-4s, SS-5s, got rid of the SS-12s. They got rid of the Pershing II. They got rid of the ground-launched cruise missile. Why? Because their very presence on European soil created the conditions conducive to a preemptive nuclear strike that would escalate to a general nuclear exchange, and all life would be over. That's why we signed the treaty. And what the Russians are saying is, you've brought us back to this point. So we are going to deploy a new generation of weapons that threatens all of you with imminent destruction. And if you come back at us with your own deployment, we're right back to square one, where we were in 1985, 86, 87, on the cusp of a world-ending nuclear conflict triggered by European unrest that manifests itself in exchange of intermediate nuclear force strikes.
It's
Notice that as Scott talks through this and the likely response of the Russians, their retaliation, that Glenn seems to become more and more uncomfortable.
well, I guess that's my very last short question was, what this might look like. This you mentioned the grand finale, because I've seen also a lot of Western reports pointing out that the Russians are churning out a lot of military equipment, but much of it's actually going to the rear, building up powerful force not even used now, even though the front lines are moving fast, and you have all these huge developments, that they're still building up a large force in the rear. So I can't remember whom, I watched an interview with a Russian official making the point that if we wanted to go all the way, we would have begun to take out all the bridges across the Dnieper River. We would, you would know if we had gone all in, as you said, that they saw this as being limited. Now, what again, delves into speculation perhaps, but based on the military options the Russians have, what could be possible? What could we be seeing in the weeks to come?
Well, again, this is speculation.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just being straight up honest about that. But the Russian,
it's very educated speculation from perhaps the leading disarmament and arms control expert in the world at this point, because that's who Scott Ritter is.
Russians had, or the Soviets back in the day.
As I've traveled the world, I've seen how we've become lost in not having any.
When confronted by Pershing II and such, had moved to develop a new version of the SS-20. I think the SS-20 Mod 3 or 4. One of the nicknames of it was, again, I'm getting Chukosk or something like that. It's a region out in Far East, across the Bering Straits from Alaska. But the idea is that if you deployed this SS-20 Mod 4, that it would be able to launch a strike using intermediate range missiles against strategic targets in the United States, threaten much of the United States. In addition to that, they developed a weapon system called the Skorost, or the speed, the fast, Skorost fast. And it was a derivative of this that allowed the Russians to respond to deployments of Pershing II. So if the Pershing II left its deployment area, the idea of the Skorost missile was that it would come out and fire, and it could hit the Pershing IIs before they manifested themselves as a threat. So it was really a preemptive weapon. And the Russians were ready to build this weapon. They had tested it, it was ready to operate when the INF Treaty was signed. Now, the Russians have gone back now. If you look at Oreshnik, what is Oreshnik? The Russians realized that they had a problem with a lack of intermediate nuclear forces or immediate range missiles. It created a gap in Europe that was being exploited through other means by the Europeans, Storm Shadow, Scalp, things of that nature. And so the Russians wanted to develop a system that could respond. So the system was the RS-26. It was a missile that, because of the INF Treaty, had to be tested at strategic ranges. So the first test of the RS-26, I believe, took it to strategic range. But then when you start adding on all the other stuff, it brings it back to an intermediate range missile. And so its goal, though, was to provide those kind of strategic fires that don't involve the launch of a strategic nuclear missile. But the Russians basically mothballed that because of the INF Treaty. What is Oreshnik? Oreshnik is a modernized version of that missile. Oreshnik provides Russia with those strategic capabilities. Russia launched against the Ukrainians was a missile that was technically in research and development. It hadn't reached full-scale production. But Putin declared it to be a missile that had reached full-scale production. So I believe that right now you've seen, when I was an inspector in Votkinsk, which is where Oreshnik is being assembled, and I know the plant that it's being assembled at, you were looking at the ability to crank out 60 to 80 Oreshniks or SS-20s a year. You could surge that to maybe 80 to 100. But let's just assume that the Russians went into full-scale production of the Oreshnik missile. And that decision was made in November. So we're talking, December, January, February, March, April, May, June. 7 months at 80 missiles per month. Now, I'm not too much of a mathematician, but 7 times 8 is what, 50, 56, something like that. 560. There's 560 Oreshniks out there right now. Okay, nobody.
Okay, I think he made a mistake about that because he said that it was 80 missiles a year they had the capability of actually producing. So 80 missiles a year is about, giving the benefit of a doubt of a few more. Uh, it's roughly 7 missiles a month. And he started saying 8 times 7. 8 times 7 is 56. In other words, so I think what he meant to say was 56 missiles a year, perhaps, or maybe 56 missiles in the 7 months, since they started to produce. Now, 56 Oreshniks is still a huge number of missiles for them to have available because the Oreshniks are so powerful. It's a strategic missile that could incinerate, you know, the downtown areas of the major powers of Europe. Okay, including the downtown area, of London. It's an extremely capable, destructive missile.
In the West is talking about that. They're talking about, oh, maybe a dozen here. There's 560 Oreshniks that have been built already. Now, the Oreshnik represents a Soviet era thinking of Cold War. I always warn people there's a danger to go back to the Cold War because we didn't win the Cold War. We didn't win the Cold War. If there was actually a war fought in the Cold War, we would have lost it decisively. I mean, we found that out at the end when we sent our guys into East Germany when the wall collapsed, and we started stealing the actual tanks with the advanced Russian reactive armor. And in the tank, we got a hold of the Russian ammunition. And what we found was that our ammunition that was issued to all of our frontline units could not touch the Russian reactive armor. That if the Russians came across the border, our main gun rounds would be bouncing off of them. Their main gun rounds, on the other hand, would be penetrating the M1 like a hot knife through butter. There's that. Plus, if the Russians had done the Skoros missile and deployed it, it was ready for instant deployment. All of our Pershing 2s would have died. All our ground-launched cruise missiles would have died. The SS-20 would have dominated the European land. There was no missile defense, and everything would be over. The Russians would have won that war. That's a guarantee. The Russians know this. So what have the Russians done? On the missile side, Oreshnik has come in. That's the SS-20 equivalent. I believe the Russians have also built.
If you're thinking of selling your house, want to know how much more you could be getting by using this brand new way to sell? The real estate market is
a Skoros version. It hasn't been deployed yet. They're not talking about it yet. But I think you're going to find that part of this new, this grand finale you're going to see is going to be the unveiling of a Skoros type system. And it's going to be put on a demonstration. I don't know what they're going to strike. Maybe they'll hit all of the F-16 sites. Maybe they'll hit everything. But it's going to be done in a way that shows that Europe will instantly die if it wants to go to war with Russia. And the Skoros system, again, if they made that decision in parallel, you're talking about 500 plus missiles out now. They only need to fire, a dozen to send the signal. They still have plenty left over to take on all of Europe. What Europe is going to find out in the grand finale is that between Oreshnik and whatever the Skoros follow-on is, there is no defense in Europe. What Germany has just realized, that you're going to die. And you'll die conventionally. This isn't with nuclear weapons. That Russia will blanket you. You have no air defense, and you're all going to die. That's what Europe's going to find out. That's the signal Russia's going to send, because it has to. It has to send a signal that says, you don't get to ever have the Ukrainians launch drones against our strategic bombers ever again. It will never happen. And if it does, we take you out. That's the direction I think this is heading.
Yeah, no, I can only see massive or dramatic escalations in this war to come. And as many people always point out, it's really in the final stages of war that the losing side really accrues a lot of casualties. So I'm keeping surprised, and that there's still no serious willingness on the side of the Ukrainians and well, let's say Zelensky and the Europeans to end this war when you see that you're on the losing side. But well, anyways, Scott Ritter, thank you so much for your time. I know you're a busy man, so I appreciate it. So.
Well, thanks for having me, and I wish I could be more optimistic, but we'll see.
So, the big question left by Scott there is, what will the United States do? Scott is saying he thinks the retaliation for the attack on the bombers is going to be limited to Europe. Because the problem is, right now for the Russians, is to scare off the nations, of Europe. Okay, in other words, convince them that they cannot really do anything to stop the Russians, that they have to abandon their latest plans for support of Ukraine. He has to dissuade them from supporting efforts such as the effort that involved attack on the Triad. Okay. There's probably going to have to be a delivery of a deterrent to England, to the UK, because of the role of MI6 in this. I think Scott doesn't think that Russia is going to try to attack the United States itself. Certainly not on the mainland here, but perhaps U.S. bases, in Europe. Anyway, whether the number of Oreshniks that are available is 560 or 56, it's plenty of Oreshniks to create a deterrent, to Russia. And if Scott is right, that there is a follow-on to the old, did he call him Securus or Scurus? I forget what the term he used was. The missile name, the translation of it is Speed. If they decided to produce a follow-on to those missiles, and that they plan to unveil this, which Scott has speculated, that will destroy any possible retaliation from the Europeans, using Taurus or Scout missiles or Storm Shadows, or anything like that. ATACMS. It's those capabilities will be blown out, by the Russians, and the finale that Scott is talking about here. So that's the shape of the retaliation coming, for the attack on the bombers. That's the shape of what Scott sees for the future. I don't know if Scott is right. Of course, he was speculating, but he's a pretty educated speculator, and his analysis, which I thought was important to show to you, was that it would be a ruinous retaliation for Europe, and a ruinous retaliation for NATO, and for the EU. I think that Putin retains a desire to improve relations between the United States, and Russia. And so the United States here on the mainland will likely be spared the retaliation. there's probably enough mystery or, deniability in the situation so Trump can continue to insist. I'm sorry, so Putin can insist that Trump was not involved in the attack, which would give him an excuse to try to go ahead with, the peace negotiations with the United States. I hope that's true because that's a desirable outcome for us because we are, of course, in no position to attack the Russians right now or to support any attacks from NATO on Russia, which the Europeans might try to concoct. So there were so many points of view that you don't see elsewhere, coming out in that particular video. So many ideas about the course of the war and the kinds of perspectives, different people have in the war. Scott has put out many, many original views in the past, but I thought that video was particularly striking in terms of the originality of the analysis. I thought there were small mistakes in some part of it. I think he got, confused over the multiplication in terms of, the number of Oreshniks that are likely to be available at this point. But I also think that 56 Oreshniks is plenty to do what Russia may try to do in terms of the retaliation. Okay, do you have any comments at this point?
I thought it was very, very, very good.
Yes, just, really so imaginative in the thinking. Okay, and so original in terms of the analysis of what is going on between the Russians and the Ukrainians and the Europeans and the Americans. At this point, I thought the analysis of geopolitics in it was really masterful. Okay, at this point.
Well, I thought so too.
Yeah. So.
That was good. That was very good to hear.
Yeah. Okay, it was really amazing. So he also talked. Well, I think we should go over some of the comments at this point, and then we'll turn to the, Judge Napolitano
Okay.
video, which is also worth seeing and considering. Earl of Laurel came around. By the way, our attendance has climbed to 46 now. Earl of Laurel turned in late, probably watching what's going on in Los Angeles. Mr. Wonderful checked in at 10:45 and said, "Hello, everyone. Hello, comrades." Mr. Wonderful said, "Exactly. Russia's SMO was always about R2P, the use of military as a last resort to force, to force a negotiation. After peace negotiations were ignored, refused, while killing Russian-speaking civilians." Mr. Wonderful says Trump's Golden Dome is a money laundering operation. It's dumb. Yes, it certainly could be called that. Mr. Wonderful says exactly the military is trying to get Trump to scam the American people out of more of their tax dollars. No, I don't believe in tax dollars, but that's a subject for another video. There are no tax dollars involved. There are government dollars involved, though. And the military is trying to get Trump to scam the American people out of the dollars produced by the government when he should be cutting military spending by 3/4 and closing all, if not plus bases. And I completely agree about that too. Almost all the bases should be closed and military spending should be cut by 3/4 because we have no business trying to defend, the Europeans at this point. We have no business trying to dominate the situation in the area around China, in that part of Asia. It is time to come home because the realities don't give us the possibility of controlling, those other parts of the world. And when it comes to North and South America, we had better pay attention to the fact that Brazil is becoming increasingly more powerful and more important as time goes on, and we're going to have to come to terms with them too, and come to terms, okay, with Mexico. But if we take the right attitude, there's no reason why Mexico and Canada cannot still be the closest of friends, okay, with the United States if we run our foreign policy right. But when it comes to that, Trump's going to have to change also because he unwisely has pissed off both of our closest friends. That's been a terrible mistake. Mr. Wonderful says Russia recently launched a satellite which serves their military AI surveillance 24/7, night, day, bad weather, heavy clouds, rain, etc., or not, of entire global regions. Ukraine has no chance. Of course, they have no chance. Mr. Wonderful says, remember, Russia tested an ICBM from one corner of their country to the other side, and Russia has 11 time zones. Think about that. Oh, are you talking about Sarmat? Anyway, that's a question. Is he talking about Sarmat? So that covers the comments. I'm now going to go to our final video, and that is the Judge Napolitano video with Scott Ritter, which talks about some of these things, but is different in certain respects, including the change in the number of the arrests. Okay, here we go.
Ships. Hey guys, this is U.S. Senator John Ossoff in Georgia. And before you skip this ad, just hear me out.
Was the series of drone attacks that hit 4 Russian air bases and a couple of civilian sites 2 weekends ago?
Well, first of all, we have to understand and respect Russia's published nuclear doctrine. To understand it means we have to read the words. And I will remind your audience that unlike many in the West, to Russia, words matter. They don't speak words lightly. They definitely don't print words lightly. Russians don't have a habit of bluffing. So when Russia promulgates a nuclear doctrine that has as one of the clauses that would trigger Russian nuclear retaliation or preemptive nuclear strike on the part of Russia, a clause that reads that any non-nuclear state that strikes Russia using conventional power in a manner that threatens Russia's strategic nuclear deterrence or Russia's existential survival and is backed by a nuclear power, this will be treated as an attack on Russia by that nuclear power. So this attack, which was carried out by Ukraine, targeted Russia's strategic nuclear deterrence. This puts Russia at an existential threat. And this attack was facilitated by the British and to some extent by the United States. So the Russian nuclear doctrine was triggered, which means Russia would have had every right to use nuclear weapons either in retaliation or to preempt what it had every right to believe was a follow-on attack by the United States and Great Britain, just as we would. I just want to remind your audience that if for instance, China and North Korea conspired with Mexican cartels to send in covert fashion truckloads of drones and park them outside of Whitman Air Force Base in Missouri, where our B-2 bombers are, or Minot, North Dakota, and Barksdale, Louisiana, where B-52H nuclear capable bombers are, and then use these drones to destroy our bombers, we would be saying, is this the first act in a larger drama that could have the Chinese and North Koreans using the the destruction of America, 1/3 of America's triad, and then launch a crippling strike against the United States. So I can guarantee you in the United States, at least the discussion would be, do we launch a preemptive strike now? That is a guaranteed on the table discussion. We have been, our nuclear triad has been attacked. Do we launch a preemptive nuclear strike now? Now, wiser minds would prevail and say, no, it's a limited strike. We don't have proof of Chinese and North Korean direct involvement. We're going to calm down, which is apparently what happened in Russia. But I guarantee you this, within the Russian Ministry of Defense, they said, are we under general attack? That's how dangerous this was, Judge, because as soon as the drone hits a strategic bomber, the Russians have to ask the question, are we under general attack? And if they made the answer yes, which, hey, we're under attack, some people could say that could be, given the rhetoric. Remember, it's the British and the French who recently said our nuclear weapons are now part of a European posture versus Russia. France has actually said we're ready to have a nuclear war with Russia. Great Britain is preparing for nuclear war. So with that rhetoric, then you match it with action by a proxy being directed by the British. The Russians have every right to have said, we're under the first phase of a larger attack by Great Britain that's gone insane. We need to take Europe.
You wrote a book about.
Can anybody argue with that chain of reasoning from Scott? Because I really can't. I mean, it is certainly we would act. I don't know if we would act in as responsible way as the Russians are acting now in reply to such an attack. We have such hair trigger thinking here, and we go off half-cocked, I think, fairly easily, especially this group of neocons surrounding the president. If there were an attack from non-state actors using the same technology, and remember, that technology used for the attack on the Russian air base involved relatively cheap stuff. It was executed well, carried out well. It was in the planning for a long time. But now that people have seen that kind of attack, I think there's a real danger it could be duplicated by non-state actors in Mexico, to attack the strategic bombers of the United States. What would we do in that case if something like that happened? So it's important when looking at what the Russians are doing now to put ourselves in Russia's place and to realize that their deliberation so far about how to retaliate and their attempt to carefully calibrate the retaliation that they must do in order to deter the other side from repeating such an attack. I think we have to appreciate how carefully they're going through their calculations, and probably their retaliation will be limited by a desire not to escalate to a nuclear war. And I think that we can thank, well, we'll see if we can thank the Russian leadership for that. But I think we will be able to thank them if we have the wisdom to do so.
Up there's called Highway to Hell. Aren't French and British leaders essentially crazy to be talking like this?
Absolutely. I mean, any nuclear power would be crazy to threaten nuclear weapons unless they're under direct nuclear threat. Because people will say, well, then Russia is threatening. Well, no, Russia is just reminding the nuclear NATO and the United States, don't get engaged because we are a nuclear power. It's not the French and the British are saying, hey, Russia, don't get engaged with us because we're nuclear powers. They're saying, we don't like what you're doing in Ukraine, a war that we started, by the way, and we're threatening to bring our nuclear weapons in to help tip the scales in our favor in Ukraine. That's
when Scott says, a war we started, he's taking the position that the war was actually started by NATO, by the European powers, by the United States, with
Sanity, literally
with the coup against the government of the Ukraine in 2014, and then the oppression of the Russian speakers inside of Ukraine for 8 years. Okay, thereafter. So,
definition of insanity.
Here's what Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, said yesterday. By the way, in the audience were our friends Pepe Escobar, George Galloway, and Larry Johnson. But here's what Foreign Minister Lavrov said yesterday about the British and likely the U.S. behind the attacks. Chris, cut number 8.
It is obvious that the Ukrainian side is doing everything possible, but it would be absolutely helpless without the support, I was tempted to say Anglo-Saxons, but probably without Saxons, just without the support of the British. Although you never know, probably by inertia, some US special forces would be involved in that. But the British actually are behind all those things, I'm 100% sure.
Here's a 30-second bedtime ritual you can do to awaken your pineal gland. Did you know that your pineal gland's inability to connect with the universe?
He says he's 100% sure. That must mean he has intel.
100% certainly.
So, what Lavrov was signaling was that the Russians believe that this operation was run by the Ukrainians with the assistance of MI6 and maybe the residual assistance of U.S. intelligence services that had a hand in the planning, and perhaps had a hand in the operation, but only as kind of a residual force that was approved in a previous administration. This squares with Russia's talking about, with Scott's talking about the existence and operations of Russia House, in the last video. I think that the reference that Sergei Lavrov is making there is to the possible continuing operations of Russia House. So I think that's a conclusion that we can infer.
He's so clever to say Anglo-Saxons. Okay, I'll drop the Saxons.
Look, but the British haven't even been clever about this. The British have acknowledged that they have initiated, a program that is designed to keep Ukraine in the fight. In fact, I think that might even be the name of the program. But it is a concerted effort by the British government using the various resources it has available to it, including that of MI6, to keep Ukraine in the fight. And one aspect of keeping Ukraine in the fight right now is to use asymmetrical capabilities, covert action, to create the conditions to provoke a Russian overreaction, the scope and scale of which would be so much that the West would feel compelled to intervene, because that is the only pathway of salvation for Ukraine.
So that point is so important. What Scott is saying is the British, and the European actors acting with Ukraine, trying to get the Russians to use tactical nukes so they can drag the United States into a nuclear war, against Russia. That is so irresponsible. I can't even begin to say how irresponsible that is. It is absolutely suicidal, but I believe that is what is going on. That's what the MI6 crazies are trying to do. That is what the European crazies are trying to do. It's just evil, absolutely evil. So, Okay, I'll go on with the video at this point. You got any comments, Dee?
No, continue on.
Have lost this war on the battlefield. Judges, you take a look, the Russians have penetrated Dnipropetrovsk. They're closing in on Sumy. The Ukrainians are collapsing across the battlefield. The Russians now are talking about, moving in even deeper. They've annihilated the air defense. They have free reign over Ukraine strategically. They haven't finished with their retaliation attack. It's over on the ground. So the only hope Ukraine has is for an intervention by European states backed by the United States. This isn't going to happen on its own volition. So what the British are seeking to do is play this very dangerous game of brinksmanship, of provoking the Russians to the point where Russia will do something that will have to trigger a Western response. And there are some people who I'm in communication with in the United Kingdom right now who are linked to this decision-making cycle, believe that the British are deliberately provoking Russia to use a tactical nuclear weapon against Ukraine, under the belief that that is the only condition under which now Europe and the United States may become decisively engaged. So Britain is provoking Russia to use nuclear weapons against Ukraine. That is what's happening. Now, that is not something I think the United States is pursuing, but mechanisms of facilitation of this plan have been put in place by the United States. Remember, it's the United States, not Britain, inside Ukraine to carry out covert actions. And one of those bases is a drone operation center. And the British play a very important role in that. So the technology, the planning, the tactics, techniques that have been transferred by the United States and the British to the Ukrainians that facilitated this attack, that is what Lavrov talks about, the inertia, meaning that we started something. Trump may have temporarily put a pause on it, but we started something, and through inertia, that is facilitating the British assistance to Ukraine to carry out these strikes.
Okay, so you have to ask the question at some point, why do the British hate the Russians so much that they would engage in this and take the kind of risks that they're taking? I mean, I just don't understand. I know the history of the rivalry of Britain, and Russia. It's certainly a long history. But I don't understand the hatred that the ruling class in Britain evidently has for Russia.
Mm-hmm.
It transcends the question, of ideology. Russia, was once a monarchy and very primitive in its social system, and the British hated them then. And when Russia was the core of the Soviet Union, of course, the British were terribly afraid of the ideology of the Soviet Union, so they hated them then. And then, but now, Russia has modernized, obviously, considerably. It's primarily, a capitalist country right now. It's strong in the religious aspect of the country. Why do the Brits hate so that they would put themselves and everybody else in a position of risking a nuclear war for the sake of trying to break Russia? What is it that motivates that kind of thing in the ruling class of Great Britain? I don't understand.
I want to get, I'm going to change the subject slightly because you alluded to it in your last really terrific answer. And I want to get back to nuclear weapons, the British, and their crazy provocations. How much longer can Ukraine survive? You talked earlier about the continued westward march of the Russian military. How soon before Ukraine collapses, either because the military gives up the ghost and goes home, or Zelensky and the government leaves the country or is killed?
Procrastination isn't your fault. It's a broke mentality.
Well, first of all, we have to be realistic here. The Russians, although they have this military supremacy on the ballot, we'll call it superiority, supremacy in some areas, they're prevailing. The Russians are dictating the pace of action in a way that the Ukrainians can't respond. Their force structure is such that they could probably push to the Dnieper River and make some inroads into Mykolaiv. But they would require significant reinforcement to go beyond that, meaning that if they were to make a push to Odessa to get to Transnistria up by the Moldovan border, this would require hundreds of thousands of additional troops. If they were to push down through Belgorod or Kursk to take Chernihiv and Sumy and take Kharkov, additional hundreds of thousands of troops. So the Russians right now.
Okay, so I should add there was another video today. Danny Haiphong had a video in which Scott and Garland Nixon and and also Larry Wilkerson, Colonel Wilkerson, were a panel, on this video. And Scott then stated this view that Russia would need hundreds of thousands more troops to conquer the Kharkov area, and get to the Odessa area. Okay, and the others disagreed about that because of the immigrants. I'm sorry, because of the imminence of the possible Ukrainian collapse. Okay, so Scott here is assuming, that the collapse will not come soon, and there will still have to be major fights for Kharkov and Mykolaiv. But if there is a collapse of the government that occurs soon, and there's a military collapse of the army, and the army is in terrible shape, right now, then I think all bets are off as to how many troops are going to be required to, take over, their other areas, because the opposition could be on the point of melting away, even right now. And Scott agrees that, the Ukrainian military is in desperate shape. So I thought I should bring that perspective to you, that there are other people, very, very wise people, Garland Nixon and Larry Wilkerson, who think the end could be much quicker than what Scott is assuming right here.
I believe they can accomplish their immediate tasks, which is the securing of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Lugansk, and then to make inroads into a buffer zone in the Dnipropetrovsk, Mykolaiv, Kharkov, Sumy region. They're fully capable of doing this. But
Right.
to make that final push would require the Russians to mobilize several 100,000 more troops, and that takes time. So the Ukrainians can collapse where they currently are, but if they fall back to the Dnieper River and start building a defensive there, it's possible for Ukraine to stay in this fight militarily for some period of time. The problem is the economic, social, and political collapse that comes with this. The Russians basically are taking out Ukraine's industrial capacity. They've already destroyed it economically. Ukraine defaulted on its loans. It has no money. They can't even afford to buy their dead back. And that's not buying their dead back. It means that when they receive their dead, they have not acknowledged their dead and then pay the families. And they don't have the money to do that. And then we're already seeing the political collapse, widespread discussion about Zelensky's final days, the moving control of the government to the parliament, new elections. And it's that aspect of it's going to bring about the end of the war. Not the military collapse, but the economic, social, and political collapse. And I believe that's coming sooner rather than later.
Back to the
So Scott has clarified his position here. The tough fights that he envisions assume that it's possible for Ukraine to go on. But if we take Scott's thinking about the retaliation by the Russians, from the earlier video, and we assume that there's going to be very severe retaliation in Europe, making it clear to the European countries that they better not continue to support the war effort, inside of Ukraine. If that retaliation works, okay, then of course the possibility that Ukraine will be receiving a financial, economic, and various kinds of military support, that possibility is going to be foreclosed. And that's going to hasten the political and economic and military collapse, of Ukraine. So if in the next few weeks we get the retaliation that we've been talking about for the bombing of the air bases, there might also be a collapse in the will of the Europeans to support what's going on inside, of Ukraine. And I think we already see, that Donald Trump doesn't really want to continue the support, of Ukraine here. And if Scott is right about the awesomeness of the finale that Russia is going to introduce in terms of the retaliation, if he's right about that, then it also means that Russia will not have to mobilize the extra troops in order to get the collapse of Ukraine, and that collapse is going to come a lot sooner. So if Scott is right about the kind of a retaliation we're going to see from the Russians and the effects of that particular retaliation, then it follows he's wrong about the likelihood of Russia needing to mobilize hundreds of thousands more troops to absorb the Kharkov area and Odessa and Mykolaiv. So,
British provocations. A couple questions. One, I believe you told us in another interview that the British cannot use their nuclear weapons without express consent of the U.S. Is that still the case?
Just one more screenshot, and this SOP is finally done. What the?
First of all, the relationship between Great Britain and the United States when it comes to nuclear control is a very classified relationship. And so I don't have direct knowledge of this. And if I did, I couldn't talk about it. So this is speculative on my part based upon talking with other people, etc. But because the British used the Trident missile as their delivery system, and the relationship between the British and Americans when it comes to nuclear warheads, etc., that the British, my understanding is that the British cannot use that Trident missile without express permission from the United States.
Is Vladimir Putin morally and legally justified in attacking London?
Morally, no. No. Legally, yes. Fortunately, Russia has a moral president, and the consequences that are accrued by attacking London, the expansion of this conflict will result in hundreds of thousands, if not millions, more dead people, and no moral man in the world can make that can make that pitch. I mean, what happened to the Russians, to the dozen Russians who died in the terrorist attack on their trains, the hundreds who were wounded, is horrible. But international humanitarian law and just basic human decency requires proportionality and retaliation. And so you can't speak of expanding a conflict in a way that threatens hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people with death because you're retaliating for 12 dead.
What do you think they're talking about in light of the certainty with which Foreign Minister Lavrov stated the British were behind this?
Well, we've already seen this. There was a strike, I believe, in Kiev of what used to be the former British passport office, which had been converted to non-passport related British activities in Ukraine. That building no longer exists. And I believe you're going to see the Russians start to specifically target British infrastructure inside Kiev, inside Ukraine, in Odessa. And either the British are going to be compelled to leave Ukraine or die in Ukraine. And I think that's the direction this is heading.
Wow.
So that's a very important point that was not stated, in the earlier video. Scott doesn't believe the retaliation against the British will be targeted to Britain itself, that it will be instead directed to British interests inside of Ukraine, and I suppose perhaps British interests in Poland or in other areas of Europe, but it probably won't extend to Britain itself. And if that's true, if the Russians then stick to that, that would be the humanitarian thing to do, rather than sending an Orishnik into the middle of London. That's what I was afraid of. But Scott evidently doesn't think that's going to happen. I hope he's right.
Long-term American-Russian relations. Do you think the Kremlin believes Trump's denials? I mean, I don't think so in light of what Lavrov just said.
Well, what Lavrov said is through inertia, meaning that something had been set in motion and wasn't able to be stopped. I do actually believe that Donald Trump did not order this attack, and he personally was not cognizant of this attack because Donald Trump is not in control of American policy. If Donald Trump was in control of American policy, he would have signed an executive order by now, which ended the Biden administration's policy directive of seeking the strategic defeat of Russia. But Trump hasn't changed that, which means the official policy of the United States that, is the foundation for what Marco Rubio does, Steve Witkoff does, Scott Bessent. The official policy is to continue policies that seek the strategic defeat of Russia. And the strategic defeat of Russia means the collapse of the Putin regime through economic sanctions.
Trump has not rescinded that internally amongst his national security people?
No, not only that, he hasn't signed a finding reversing the covert action directives have been given the CIA regarding support to Ukraine and hostile action towards Russia. So we are technically in a state of war with Russia right now, and the Russians know this. And so what they're hoping is that they can get Trump on a diplomatic path where these things can come to an end. But if you don't stop this, again, I've tried to explain to people, Gina Haspel, Bloody Gina, was a veteran operations officer who became the director of the CIA.
Right.
Normally, when you bring in an outsider to the CIA won't listen. But she came from DO, which means she has the guns, she has the resume to have people listen. She tried to take control of Russia House. She said they're lying to her and they're lying to the president. They're doing things.
Well, what's Russia House?
Russia House is that part of the CIA's director of operations that runs covert operations against
All right,
Russia.
back to what you were saying. Go ahead. She tried to take control.
She tried to
Russia
shut
House.
him down.
She couldn't.
And she couldn't do it. Ratcliffe can't do it. Russia House is out of control. And until you shut down Russia House and you terminate the employment of all these people and shut down every operation they're in, Russia House will continue its decades-long war against Russia. It has built resources inside Russia. It has recruited networks inside Russia that not only look for short-term intelligence gain, but their job is, in the case of increased hostilities, to create disruption. They have planted viruses in the Russian infrastructure to shut down traffic lights, shut down electronic generation. We're at war with Russia as we speak right now. And that needs to be shut down, and it's not, and that's Donald Trump's fault. This is the
Donald Trump had better get control of his own government.
Mm-hmm.
He sends troops into LA. He sends National Guard into LA. Okay, and Marines. into LA. And this is to cover up the fact that he doesn't have control over his own foreign policy in his own government.
Mm-hmm.
This supposed tough guy doesn't have enough stones to get rid of Russia House. That is what Scott Ritter is saying here. He doesn't have control over his own CIA, and he seems incapable of getting it, and they're working directly against his foreign policy goals and objectives.
Inertia that Lavrov is speaking of.
Okay, great explanation. Here's Secretary Hegseth about an hour ago. Chris, not the whole clip, but just up to the part where he says the U.S. was not aware. Cut number 11.
Are we seeing the ushering in of a new era of warfare? The use of drones from afar. After all, these drones were smuggled into Russia, hidden for a great span of time, and then activated from 2,500 miles away. Are we prepared, both defensively and offensively? Ms. Secretary.
It was a daring and very effective operation that we were not aware of in advance and reflects significant advancements in drone warfare, which we are.
Have you ever wondered how buying Israeli goods helps Israel during turbulent times with attacks from?
Is that credible that we were not aware of in advance, or was he kept in the dark by whatever inertial forces Sergei Lavrov says were likely involved?
I guarantee you, somewhere in the CIA's files, in their directorate of operations, ground branch, or even air branch, or some sort of joint paramilitary capability, is the conversion of civilian trucks to be used as a drone mother base, and to park in with remote connectivity using existing commercial capabilities to direct these drones equipped with explosives to strike targets. We came up with this. This is our plan, and we trained the Ukrainians on this plan, but not the specific targeting, just to build this capabilities, because this is a year and a half. To carry out this plan, you need a safe house inside, a safe warehouse inside Russia that has to be purchased using funds that can't be readily traced by the FSB, using a network of agents already embedded inside Russia who have sustainability, meaning that they have jobs, they have documents that pass scrutiny, they're not going to be picked up on the street, and everything's going to be given away. This is what the CIA and MI6 do. This is an American-British plan that the Ukrainians, fell in. So for Hegseth, first of all, I don't think Hegseth, Judge, again, I don't mean to pick on this guy, but he's a battalion operations officer. That's it. Now, those are some good people, but they do battalion-sized operations. This man's commenting on some major geopolitical stuff that he has no knowledge of. It's not in his toolbox. His brain can't comprehend this, and he hasn't been read into this. He's only the Secretary of Defense. And if you think the Secretary of Defense knows what Russia House has been doing inside Russia, think again. So he's up there. They're asking the wrong question to the wrong guy. That question should be asked to Tulsi Gabbard, John Ratcliffe, and the head of the Russia House in closed session. That's where you'll get your answers.
One of the people in the chat room says, but Scott, Pete does great push-ups because, as you know, he has himself filmed bare-chested doing push-ups with the troops. Listen, I know him, and I share your analysis is deeper than mine. Even though I worked with him for 10 years, I share your analysis. What are the long-term prospects for a reset between the United States and Russia if Trump does not do what you just articulated he needs to do? I mean, I don't even know if he knows that these findings are out there and he needs to rescind them.
It's worse than that, Judge. We actually have created poison pill after poison pill after poison pill. First of all, I want to remind your audience that on February 5th, 2026, that's next year, the last remaining arms control treaty between the United States and Russia expires. The New START treaty. And when that expires, there's no more caps on arsenals. Overnight, if we don't have something put in overnight, reserve nuclear warheads that were withdrawn will be brought back, mounted, and we will see the tripling or quadrupling of our strategic nuclear forces overnight. So for Americans to go to sleep at night saying, well, there's only 1,550 deployed nuclear weapons on each side, I mean, that's a lot too. But it's going to be about 6,000 to 8,000 immediately. And that's just the beginning of an arms race that will ultimately, when you start moving in that trajectory, it will lead to the end of the world. But then to make things worse, Trump is talking about deploying this Golden Dome ballistic missile shield. It's not going to work. The technology is not proven. They can't do it in 3 years, and it's not going to cost $175 billion. It's going to cost closer, according to Theodore Postal, $40 trillion if you want to make the whole thing done. So it can't be done. But the Russians can't operate on the assumption, well, it's going to fail. So if Trump's talking about building it, they have to build that which overcomes it. So they will start deploying new systems that will be unconstrained by the lack of an arms control treaty. But the most dangerous thing is the statement made by Rybkov, the deputy foreign minister. He said, your withdrawal from the INF treaty, we have been voluntarily, putting constraint on our capabilities in hopes that you would come back to rationality. But next year, the United States is talking about deploying the Dark Eagle. It's a hypersonic missile, and the Russians have been preparing in response. They prepared, I believe, the Oreshnik is a response to that. And remember, the Oreshnik that fired against Ukraine last November was a research and development thing. It went into full production. It's produced at Vodkinsk machine building plant. I worked there for 2 years. The production rate of the Oreshnik is around 60 to 80 missiles a year. They've been there for now 7 months. You're looking at, around 50, 60 missiles Oreshniks being built. In addition to that, the Russians have more than likely been building a follow.
So he corrected his previous statement on the other video where he said there were 560 missiles of the Oreshnik missiles available now.
Onto a Cold War era system called the Skoros, which is a shorter range, intermediate range missile. Skoros means quick, rapid. It was designed to rapidly respond to the deployments of the Pershing II missile system back in the days when we deployed those to Germany. So when they left their deployment area, went to the field, Skoros would respond and take it out. Well, the Russians are building that, and they will deploy that. So when Dark Eagle lands in Europe, if it leaves its deployment area, the new Russian Skoros will hit it. Russia's about to flood the field with advanced hypersonic ballistic missiles that we can't defend against and will further destabilize the world. Now, within this framework, how can you possibly talk about normal, stable relations? The United States is presenting itself as an existential threat to Russia. And until the president reverses from that, you can't have good relations.
So what Scott is talking about here is an underlying problem that transcends the talks, okay, and negotiations going on and the supposed good relations between Trump and and Putin until this policy foundation is undermined, okay, and gotten rid of. The talks between Putin and Trump can produce nothing valuable in terms of a lasting peace. Not just that, but if this foundation is not overcome and gotten rid of soon, then in February of 2026, there's going to be a massive escalation of risk with respect to nuclear war because the New START 1 treaty is going to be gone. And we're going to return to huge numbers of missiles on both sides. The coming of the Dark Eagle is going to represent an existential threat, okay, to Russia, which Scott thinks is going to be replied to with those Skoros missiles. And I mean, everything is going to be impossible to overcome. It's going to be far more difficult even than it is now. So when Scott talks about the existence of Russia House, it's clear. A task is set out for the Trump administration. That is to get rid of Russia House in the short run as part of getting rid of the policy of trying to undermine the government and regime of
It's the second guy.
the Russian Federation. We have to stop trying to do that. The fate of the world is dependent on us ceasing getting rid of that policy. If we don't get rid of that policy, as Scott is often fond of saying, we're all going to die. Sorry, but I had to say it also.
Well, last series of questions. What is the significance of the claim by Iranian officials that they have secret files on Israeli nuclear capabilities?
Well, it's curious because I don't speak Farsi. I'm not smart enough. I barely speak English. But the people who do speak Farsi, when they read the original, there's some interpretation. Did the Iranians get the Israeli targeting of Iran's nuclear program, or did they get a specific layout of Israel's nuclear program, or both? But the bottom line is it shows that Iran has penetrated Israel's security mechanism. They've gained access to data that strengthens its hand in any potential conflict against you. The interesting thing is almost immediately after this breach took place, Netanyahu contacted Trump and said, we're no longer talking about attacking Iran. We'll accept that 3.75% enriched uranium thing. Remember, Israel said, never, never, never. We will never accept it.
True. I haven't seen or heard that anywhere. That would be a remarkable.
I haven't seen or heard that anywhere. This is the first I've heard of that Israel agreed to 3.75%. Because if Israel is no longer opposed to 3.75% and is abandoning the idea of attacking Iran for the time being, then the barrier is not there for Trump to not conclude a peace agreement with the Iranians based on 3.75%. By the way, it's 3.67%, but who wants to argue about small details? But the point is, if that's really true, if we can confirm what Scott had said there, it makes things much more hopeful with respect to the possibility of a conflict between the United States and Iran, which is another conflict that would also be ruinous for the United States because we don't have the capability to win a war, against Iran. That's clear. And we're going to jeopardize the 68 or so bases the U.S. has in the area surrounding Iran, because Iran can target all of them and destroy most or all of them with its hypersonic missiles. I don't know how many hypersonic missiles they have, but together the missiles and drone stock of Iran is in the hundreds of thousands. Now, I don't know how many thousands are hypersonic missiles and how many thousands of drones and how many thousands of cruise missiles, but they have an enormous number and variety of missiles that make what the Houthis have look sick and what Hezbollah had look sick. So,
an amicable resolution to this, would it not?
Well, but the caveat is temporarily, and of course the Iranians will do it. But Israel's in a panic right now because
the truth is that a lot of mushroom products out there contain mostly mycelium, and that's the stuff that grows below the soil.
Either way, let's say Iran got a hold of the target data. That means that Iran right now is shifting resources, and whatever there is, Israelis thought they were going to bomb, they aren't going to bomb. But if Israel has Iran, if Iran has Israel's nuclear precision, that means now they can bring in precision strikes and take out Israel. Israel's in a bind, and they desperately need these negotiations to work. And my understanding is that Netanyahu has indicated that he is now amicable to a temporary continuation of the Iranian nuclear program, limited to 3.75%. Why? Because Israel knows that if it wants to go to war against Iran, it's going to be taken off the face of the earth.
What are you doing on June 18th?
Trying to end this madness, John.
Okay, that last point by Scott is so important that the Israelis are no longer going to attack Iran. It opens a way, okay, it opens the way to a two-state solution. I know the Israelis think it's only temporary, but if the IDF is standing down, okay, that probably means also Netanyahu's days are numbered as prime minister, because he was dependent on aggressive actions against Iran and the further expansion, okay, of Greater Israel. With that taken off the table, as a possibility, and with the Iranians much stronger in comparison to Israel, then that creates a different situation in West Asia. The balance of power has changed in West Asia. And that means, well, I think it means also that we might have an end, to the genocide, okay, as well. But we'll have to see. The Israelis are mad. I mean, absolutely crazy. So we have to see what they're going to do now.
Judge, I mean, I've said all along.
You're doing the work of the angels, but tell us about it.
I've always said that the way to peace is through dialogue, that we have to talk, we have to engage. And yes, we have our governments talking with the Russian governments, but sometimes governments need to be trained on how to do things by their respective populations. And so on the 18th, I'm going to be doing it's the U.S.-Russian Citizens Summit. If you remember back in 1985, Phil Donahue and Vladimir Posner, Phil Donahue, famous American broadcast journalist, and Vladimir Posner, his Russian counterpart, they initiated something called the Space Bridge. And it basically brought an American audience and a Russian audience together to talk with one another, ask questions, get to know each other, begin a process of dialogue. And it led to further space bridges that helped create the conditions that brought an end to the Cold War. Well, today we see that we're getting a new Cold War-like environment. One of the big problems is that, from my perspective, is that the American people don't know the Russian people. Therefore, they are susceptible to Russophobia, being told that Russia is evil, Russia is bad, to fear Russia. And when you're afraid of something, the government can then put in place policies that generate from that fear, that create the potential for conflict. We need to train the American people to believe that the Russians aren't afraid. And the best way to do that is expose them to the reality of Russia. So this U.S.-Russian summit will bring 50 American citizens from every walk of life, and they will connect with 50 Russian citizens in St. Petersburg, and they will have a conversation for 3 hours. And it will be streamed live, and then we're also going to record it, and it'll be available. But the idea is to generate a broader dialogue between Americans and Russians, so that, when the average American is told by Pete Hegseth or somebody in the Trump administration, Marco Rubio, about the evil nature of Russia, they can go, well, that's not really the Russia I heard here. I was talking to Vladimir and Svetlana over in St. Petersburg, and that's completely different. And the same thing with the Russians. They've been told that Americans are, bloodthirsty, warmongering, heathens, and get a chance to meet Americans. We're going to do it in Kingston, New York, at Gerald Solante's fantastic Mohican Market. It's being converted into what we call the American Cafe, and we're going to show the Russians a slice of Americana. We're going to have a wonderful conversation for 3 hours, and hopefully begin a process that leads to the normalization of relations between the United States and Russia. Guys, I just painted a horrible picture about the potential of conflict. We live in a very dangerous time, and we have to do everything possible to prevent the worst possible outcome. And what we can do as citizens, because we don't make policy, we don't implement policy, but we can influence policy from the ground up. We can tell our government we're not afraid of the Russians, and therefore we don't support policies that are predicated upon the need for fear of Russia to exist. We can make ourselves immune to Russophobia. And so this is what the U.S.-Russia Citizen Summit's doing. It's on June 18th, doors open at 12 o'clock. For for a little bit of lunch. The show starts at 2. Unfortunately, it's a ticketed event only, but like I said, you can watch it. It'll be broadcast on YouTube. It'll be streamed, and then it'll be recorded, and people can watch it. But I invite everybody to tune in. It's not entertainment, although it will be entertaining. This is literally life sustaining. This is how we survive, to engage in this kind of dialogue. And it can't be 50 people talking to 50 people. We have to be triggering something larger, something broader, something more sustainable. And it needs the help of all Americans. And it needs the help of all the Russians too. But we can't get the Russians on board unless we're willing to talk to them.
You're doing the work of the angels. I've said that before. Thank you, Scott. Thanks for your analysis. Thanks for your passion. Thanks for your courage. And as always, we'll look forward to seeing you. I wish I could be there on the 18th. You know I can't, or I would have been. But I look forward to seeing you next week, and we'll talk about this again. Thank you, Scott.
Okay, thanks, Judge.
All the best. Great segment, and a great man. Coming up later today at 3 o'clock, Colonel.
Okay. So that's it. That was also a fantastic video. It had so many points in it that are important to take note of. I mean, Scott just says things that nobody else says. Okay, there are a lot of good people who are plowing the same ground as Scott, Colonel Wilkerson, Colonel McGregor, Jeffrey Sachs, John Mearsheimer, lots and lots of people who know that we, the United States, are treading a very dangerous course right now, and that we must change. And we must change fundamentally in our foreign policy. We have a lot of problems on the domestic side. We're treading a very bad path, there too. Those of us who are focusing on that, know all about that. A lot of people are working to change that. But many of the same people who are working to save us on the domestic front are also working, taking silly positions with respect to Ukraine, silly positions with respect to foreign policy. So our foreign policy orientations have to change. We have to accommodate to the realities of the multipolar world in which we are just one of the poles, an important pole, but we can't be dominating the world anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible for us to try to be the hegemon anymore. And the sooner we can adjust to this change, and the sooner we can adapt to our real position in this world, the sooner we can build prosperity and happiness here in the United States. We have the tools to do that, especially the monetary and financial tools, and we have the imagination to do that. And we have to free ourselves from foreign policy worries so we can do that here at home. It is time, it has been time for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
a radical change in the foreign policy area. We can't keep doing what we've been doing. Doing the same thing again and again and again is the definition of insanity.
Yeah.
And we have been insane, and we have to stop it.
And they're still living in the past.
Still living in the past, all right. Let us look at the final comments we got here. Mr. Wonderful said at 11:50, Russia's ensuring their military operation is contained. But yes, their nuclear red line was crossed. but Russia doesn't need to use nukes at all. I completely agree with that, Mr. Wonderful. I think Russia can limit itself to using the Skouras successor that Scott talked about, okay, and the Oreshniks. And with that and other conventional weapons, they can do what they want to and what they need to do. And Mr. Wonderful also says, with that said, I do not believe that Russia will use no nukes. They will continue their SMO until enough air defenses are eliminated to change the SMO to an anti-terrorist operation. I think they've eliminated enough air defense to probably do that right now. I think the air defenses are pretty well eliminated all across, Ukraine. Mr. Wonderful says that. Joseph Firestone, Empowering Democracy. The answer to your question about why Britain has a hatred of Russia was discussed at the Duran, titled with Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos. In short, British royalty created tropes and Russophobia within their country because they couldn't obtain a sphere of influence within Russia historically. Yes, I'm sure that has something to do with it, but I mean, that history goes back a long way. It goes back a very long way. Things are different now. Russia has greatly changed. Also, England has greatly changed. I mean, it seems beyond reason the hatred that UK elites have for Russia and for Putin specifically and for this regime, okay, in Russia, which by and large has been most concerned with building Russia and defending Russia and not attacking the rest of Europe. Mr. Wonderfeld, obviously my statement is ambiguous, but the source discussion at the Duran with Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, released today, breaks down why Britain hate Russia. I appreciate the reference very much. I'm a frequent visitor over at the Duran, and I did that. And I will certainly be looking for that video tomorrow. Thank you for calling it out for me because I'm very interested in what Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos has to say. By the way, since you referred to Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, okay, as doctor, you should also know that I am a PhD in comparative politics and international relations as well, going back to 1965. Okay. So, I guess on that note, we can probably say goodbye.
Yeah, I was just going to point out, I looked over some of the Israeli newspapers, and the Times of Israel says that Trump said to have told Netanyahu to end Gaza war, attacking Iran off limits for now. Then it says in a call on Monday, U.S. President also reportedly told Prime Minister that threats to strike Iran aren't helping nuclear talks. CENTCOM chief says White House has wide range of options if negotiations fail. So.
Yeah, well, they'll always say that wide range of options if negotiations fail. I'm afraid all the options are going to fail. So they better, conclude the negotiation. Better go back to 3.67% or 3.75%, whichever they do. But if they conclude on that basis, they can take care of the 20% need for medical research, by shipping some of the uranium they have now to Russia, and Russia will send it back when they need the 20%.
Right.
In other words, the sticking point was the 3.67%, and Trump, at the prompting of Netanyahu and the Israelis and the donors, changing his position. because he was willing to allow some enrichment to the 3.67% before. And then 3 weeks ago, Trump changed the basis of the negotiations.
Mm-hmm.
Trump is now free to go back to the 3.67%. We can avoid a war in West Asia.
Right. Now,
And we can probably end the genocide in Gaza. And that is so important for us to desire and want and support that the ending of that terrible crime.
mm-hmm. And that's, he really, Trump and Witkoff, they have to stand firm. And if Israel, not allow Israel to have this power and the donors to have this power. It's a destruction to the world. I mean, this is just, it's like enough is enough. I mean, and to think that Netanyahu is the one that's the balancing act there, that he's got the far right that, with the greater Israel, I mean, they want to go after Iran, they want to go after everybody. It's just horrific.
But he seems to be climbing down from the mountain now
Mm-hmm.
because he's finally realized that it's within the power of Iran to destroy Israel. And that
Yes.
he's going to play nice for a while. And by the
Mm-hmm.
way, I don't think, well, I shouldn't say there's nothing Israel can do. I know they've been working on the Iron Beam for some time. And I know they probably think the Iron Beam can take care of the hypersonic missiles. But I don't think it can, because even if the Iron Beam is extremely effective, uh, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of hypersonic missiles are going to overload the Iron Beam. No matter how effective it is on small numbers of hypersonic missiles, that's not what they're facing with respect to the Iranians. If the Iranians can launch 3,000 targeted hypersonic missiles in STEM, they're done for, Iron Beam or no Iron Beam.
Mm-hmm.
I think Netanyahu knows that, and that's why he's been changing his tune. So let's go. He keeps on changing it. We know, of course, that they will keep on trying to find ways to neutralize the hypersonics of, the Iranians. But I don't think they're going to be successful with that anytime soon. I think the Iranians have too many people, too many scientists, and too many resources for the Israelis. As clever as they are at weapons and weapons technology, I don't think they'll be able to counter what the Iranians now have.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy,
I know it's too much.
it's too much. Well, we're approaching 4 hours now. It's 3 minutes 40. It's 3 hours 43 minutes and 10 seconds. So I think it may be time to say goodnight. Thank you all for coming. I notice we're up to 50 people now, and that is pretty good. Perhaps I should start my shows at 10 o'clock and go from 10 to 2 or something like that. But anyway, for now, I'm just going to say goodnight. I'll see you all again on Saturday, and I'll be collecting all kinds of interesting information throughout the week to make that show a great one.
Yes, usually your shows are very good. They're very good, like I said, collecting the important information that needs to be told, what people need to hear, and breaking it down. It works out very well.
And which they're not hearing from other sources.
No, they're not.
Yeah. So thank you, Dee, and thank you for joining me again.
Thank you for having me, and good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
Okay, good night, Dee, and good night, everybody. Yes. I will see you again on Saturday, and Dee will have shows between now and Saturday as well.
Yes, I will.
check in, with Around the World with Dee and Friends this week. I'm sure she's going to have some very interesting shows during the week.
Yes, I will.
Okay, so
Well,
thank you
thank you.
and good night
Good night and free Palestine.
from the river to the sea.
Amen. Mr. Wonderful says cheers.
Okay, so long, Mr. Wonderful. So long, everybody. So long, Steve Wolfbrand, if you're still here.